Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 41. Vacation Interrupted. Byakuya was relaxing, practicing his calligraphy when a loud, panting voice interrupted from directly outside the door. Kuchiki-sama, there is urgent news. Sighing to himself, the head of the Kuchiki raised his head and looked at the door solemnly. Enter. The door flew open and Byakuya's internal alarms went off when he saw that it was the escort he'd sent with Kurosaki Masaki. The escort was injured, with his clothing ripped and torn, but his blood flowed slowly from his wounds. He had obviously been attacked, but the wounds were shallow, non-critical. It wouldn't have been urgent unless he'd been defeated, and judging by the rate of blood flow, it was a short time ago. Byakuya would have narrowed his eyes were he a lesser man who displayed his emotions and thoughts for all to see. You have been attacked, and defeated, no more than 10 minutes ago. Your charge was taken from you. Take me to where you were. Startled at his master's succinct and accurate summation of the news, the escort took a moment to react, then nodded sharply and turned around, running back the way he'd come, using Shunpo as soon as he hit open space. Following easily, Byakuya mentally nodded to himself and made a note to show some form of appreciation for his trainers. They'd obviously taught the Kuchiki servants well. The escort's Shunpo was mediocre compared to the average Shinigami, but rarely was more skill required. His servant's voice interrupted his musings a moment later. Here, my lord. Byakuya looked around the area. Begrudgingly, he had to admit that whoever the kidnappers had been, their spot was well chosen. It was outside the grounds of any noble family, and relatively close to the west gate. The suspect list was maximized. It could have been anyone in the Seraiti. Tell me what you can about your assailant, he ordered calmly, but sternly. He was quick, the escort reported. Very fast, completely covered in dark clothes, except his eyes. Didn't say anything at all, just appeared out of nowhere, knocked Kurosaki-san out with the handle of his sword, and then attacked me. He vanished with her as soon as I was knocked down. Vanished. Did he use Shunpo? Byakuya asked to clarify. I think so, sir. That narrows the suspect list down to those trained in Shunpo. Hardly an improvement, but it is one nonetheless. Is there anything else? A nod was his response. He left this where he disappeared, the servant explained, passing him a piece of paper. Byakuya scrutinized it with suspicious eyes. Kurosaki Ichigo. We have your mother. Come alone to Sokyoku Hill by noon tomorrow. Failure to do so will result in her soul being summarily banished to hell. The 6th Division Taicho looked up from the paper, unable to keep his eyes from narrowing. He knew that handwriting, it was that of Soifun, Taicho of the 2nd Division. Has she truly gone mad? And surely she does not have the capacity to do such a thing. Then again, the Onmitsukido is known for information gathering and spying. It may be possible for her to find how to do such a thing, and I know no others with the resources to find out independently. Alternatively, Byakuya thought critically, Yamamoto Sotaicho could be aiding her. He would certainly know how to open the gates of hell. Neither of them holds any affection for Kurosaki Ichigo. This would fall under his modus operandi to get rid of a threat subtly, as well as test my own loyalties simultaneously. My recent actions, aiding Rukia and Abarai to escape and aid Kurosaki Ichigo, would certainly warrant that. Eyes dark, Byakuya came to a decision. Return to the estate. I will handle the situation personally. Hi. The Kuchiki servant, who still remained nameless, acknowledged with a salute and vanished in a burst of Shunpo. A moment later, Byakuya was gone from the clearing as well. Materializing just outside the 1st Division HQ, he stepped inside. I require a meeting with Yamamoto Sotaicho. Nodding sharply, Sasaki Fukuteicho led the way. A few moments later, Byakuya stood in front of the Sotaicho. He explained briefly what had happened. Sir, this appears to be Soifun Taicho's handwriting, and the description my servant gave me seems indicative of an assassin. What are your orders? Yamamoto's change in expression was subtle, but the way the temperature rose in the room was enough indication for Byakuya to conclude that Yamamoto was furious. Arrest Soifun Taicho, and bring her to me immediately. So it was not a test, the 6th Division Taicho mused. Hi. Once more, the head of the Kuchiki flickered away, this time to the 2nd Division HQ. Stepping into the Taicho's office, he instead found Soifun to be absent. Focusing his senses outward, Byakuya realized that neither Soifun nor her rotund Fukuteicho were nearby. This does not bode well. With a nod to himself, Byakuya made a decision. He would spend the night scouring Soul Society for Soifun in an attempt to follow Yamamoto Sotaicho's orders without unduly involving Kurosaki Ichigo. However, should he fail, very few people were capable of catching Soifun should she be located, and Byakuya would contact Urahara to acquire Yoruichi's and Kurosaki's services. Ichigo woke to the sound of the phone that Urahara had given him ringing. It was early in the morning, the substitute noted sleepily as he shielded his eyes from the sun coming in from the window. MMPH, he groaned, picking up the phone. Kuro, Sake Ichigo speaking, he greeted, his family name interrupted by a yawn. It's Kazuki. We've got serious trouble. Ichigo, it's your mother. Ichigo was fully awake in a heartbeat. What happened? Ichigo, Renji muttered, waking up as he felt his roommate's increase in Reiatsu. As soon as he saw Ichigo's too serious face, he sobered up and waited for Ichigo to get off the phone. The wizard's eyes narrowed. I'll be there as quickly as I can. He hung up the phone. Why yes. The mod soul stuttered, looking nervously at Ichigo's humorless expression. Take care of my body while I'm gone. Renji looked at his comrade grimly. Ichigo, what happened? My mother's been kidnapped by someone in Soul Society. Soifun is the prime suspect. Tell me how to open the Senkaimon. Renji winced. Oh, this can't end well. Try not to fight the entire Gote 13. He offered weakly. No promises. Ichigo reached into his pack and dug out his Shinigami representative badge, smacking it against his chest and emerging from his body in his Shinigami form. He drew Zangetsu and looked at Renji expectantly. The tattooed redhead nodded. Envision Soul Society as best you can. Then, holding that image, envision where we are right now and compartmentalize them into two separate things. I find it easier to think of them as dimensional bubbles. Let me know when you've got it. A moment later, Ichigo nodded. What's next? Remember the Dongai, and place it between your images of Soul Society and the living world. When you have it, focus your intent to cross the barrier between the dimensions and thrust Zangetsu forward, Renji taught. If part of Zangetsu seems to disappear through an invisible curtain, then just twist and the Senkaimon appears. Zangetsu began to glow a light blue before Ichigo's eyes, and he slowly pushed his Zanpakuto forward through the air. Just like Renji had said, Zangetsu could still be felt, but the latter half of the sword was invisible. Ichigo gave a sharp twist and withdrew his trusty blade. The air in front of the wizard twisted and distorted before materializing the sliding doors of the Senkaimon that would lead Ichigo into the Dongai, and from there to Soul Society. Before he could step through, Renji gripped his friend by the arm. Ichigo, are you sure you don't want us there? Ichigo looked at Renji. Yes, I'm sure. I don't want any of my friends to see what I'm going to do. And what are you going to do? Whatever it takes. Ichigo broke Renji's grip and entered the dimensional gateway. Ichigo, Rukia's voice cried out as she burst into the room, just in time to see the Senkaimon close behind her friend. Renji, what the hell is going on? Why is Ichigo going to Soul Society? Renji looked at his old friend, fists clenched. Rukia, you didn't see what I saw, when Ichigo and Aizen continued their fight in Soul Society. He shook his head. Rukia, we need to seriously consider that the Gote 13 might not exist tomorrow. What? Rukia gasped. No, he wouldn't. Ichigo's mother was kidnapped by Soifun Taicho, Renji explained hollowly. Oh no. Rukia breathed, casting her eyes on where Ichigo had disappeared into the Senkaimon. Ichigo. Ichigo stepped into Soul Society without incident. Not trusting himself not to verbally eviscerate the first Shinigami he talked to, the wizard focused for a moment on his spiritual sense. The largest concentration of spiritual power, which likely belonged to Yamamoto or a group of Taicho, was this way. Ichigo began walking purposefully, even as he seethed with barely contained rage. My mother, how dare she? How dare she? Ichigo hardly noticed that every step he took left blackened scorch marks on the pavement. His Reiatsu had slipped into its evolved state and his power seethed invisibly around him. It was perhaps for the best that he didn't hear the several Shinigami recognize him and whisper excitedly about him, following at a distance to see why he was in Soul Society. It was not long before Ichigo reached his destination, the 1st Division barracks. Entering swiftly, he ignored everyone else and walked with a purpose straight into Yamamoto's office. Byakuya and Yamamoto looked at him as he entered, but stayed silent. Fine then, I'll break the silence. How did this happen? Ichigo asked quietly, but with frigid tones and narrowed eyes. Your mother, Kurosaki Masaki, had joined me for a casual conversation over tea, Byakuya replied calmly, apparently unperturbed by Ichigo's bluntness. One of my servants was escorting her home when they were attacked. My servant was defeated, and she was taken. Evidently, the attacker also left a note which orders you to meet someone at Sokyoku Hill at noon today, or else your mother will die. The note was written in Soifun Taicho's handwriting. We have not been able to contact her since. Don't you have some sort of locator Kido? Ichigo asked. Yes. Bakudo 58. Kakushitsujuku, Yamamoto confirmed. There are limitations to that spell, however. Firstly, it requires the user to remain in one spot. Secondly, there is a range limit. Thirdly, the user must be familiar with the Reiatsu he or she is attempting to track, which is why we have been unable to use it to track your mother. Fourthly, there are ways to avoid detection from this spell in any case, which are well known to Soifun and the Onmitsukido due to their nature as assassins. As a result, its applicability in this situation is low. Ichigo scowled. Do you have any other method to track her? No, the head of the Kuchiki responded. Soifun, as leader of the Onmitsukido, has mastered how to erase her presence entirely. So the only choice is to have me go along with the note and wait on Sokyoku Hill, Ichigo concluded darkly, turning to leave. Fine then. Kurosaki Ichigo, Yamamoto rumbled, halting Ichigo's step. We would have you visit the 12th Division to have a listening and tracking device planted and concealed upon your person, in the event that an unexpected situation occurs. We will, of course, remove the devices after the issue is resolved. All right. On a final note, be warned. Whoever has your mother has threatened to send her soul to hell. That is highly forbidden knowledge. Any who know the methods are extremely resourceful. I had thought I had destroyed all the records centuries ago. Do not underestimate them. Ichigo faced Yamamoto seriously. Got it. Thanks for the warning. When there were no further comments, the wizard nodded and turned on his heel. Opening the door, he looked over his shoulder. Let me leave you one of my own. If my mother is not found and retrieved safely, Soul Society will burn. He was gone before they could reply. That was not entirely unexpected, Byakuya finally remarked a minute later. No, it was not, Yamamoto agreed heavily. Can you see why I believe another war is coming? He would sacrifice the entire afterlife to save one soul. I understand your perspective, but I respectfully disagree with your conclusion, Sotaicho, Byakuya demurred. That's all you want? Mayuri asked, disappointed with the wizard's request. Surely you would let me. No, Ichigo replied firmly. Yamamoto asked me to get listening and tracking devices, not to donate a limb or piece of my Reiatsu. It's not like you can't regenerate it. Mayuri tried to persuade him with what he obviously thought was a reasonable argument. Think of the science. No, you can't simply expect me to not to at least get a sample of. The Taicho exclaimed disbelievingly, only to halt when he felt Zangetsu's tip resting against his Adam's apple. Utter silence fell in the room. No one drew a Zanpakuto on the Taicho in his lab. No one. I am not a test subject, Ichigo whispered harshly. And I am not in the mood to put up with anything right now. I am only here because Yamamoto asked me to be. If you are unwilling to help, I will be leaving. He replaced Zangetsu on his back, its wrappings automatically sheathing the blade. Then Ichigo did an about-face and began to make his way out. Mayuri scowled. Fine then, have your trinkets. He scooped up two rather small, seemingly random devices from a nearby table and threw them at Ichigo, who sidestepped and caught one in each hand. The one in your left hand is the tracker. It's designed to go on a leg, since you're less likely to lose that than an arm. The device in your right hand is the listener. Just stick it somewhere on your uniform and it'll blend in seamlessly. The devices are largely covered in Sekiseki stone to prevent your evolved Reiatsu from harming them. Now if you aren't here to help my research, get out of my sight, you selfish plebeian. Gladly. Ichigo walked out briskly, and then quietly equipped the devices as Mayuri had specified. The tracker was reminiscent of living world tracking bracelets. Ichigo found that it fit disturbingly well. The listener was really just a tiny transmitter stuck on a pin, Ichigo saw, and he just put it on his chest. True to Mayuri's word, it flashed for a moment before blending in, changing the color of the sekiseki to match Ichigo's black shihakusho. An illusion, he wondered vaguely. Shaking his head to clear it, Ichigo refocused on the issue at hand. His face a mask of determination, he flickered away, appearing where the Sokyoku had been a few moments later. He sat and closed his eyes, focusing entirely on his Reiatsu sense. In his mind's eye, he felt hundreds, thousands of Reiatsu signatures at the various barracks. Several of them, he recognized as being Taicho or various Fukuteicho or officers that he'd met, but Ichigo was focused on finding two in particular, and he was looking throughout Seraiti. Meanwhile, back in the living world, Ichigo's friends had just been told the bad news by Rukia and Renji in the privacy of Inoue's room. Renji watched as his allies, his friends, transformed visibly from vacationing teenagers to combat-ready warriors almost in an instant. I knew we couldn't trust the Gote 13. Ishida spat, before whirling on the messengers. Why aren't you two with him? He demanded angrily. Because Ichigo can take care of himself, and someone needed to be here to tell you what was going on, Rukia replied firmly. Besides, I know I'm no match for Soifun. She's too fast for me, and Renji too. HMPH. Thanks for your vote of confidence, Renji said irately, glaring at his best friend momentarily. Even so, she's right, he agreed reluctantly, turning back to the others. Also, consider that Ichigo killed Aizen. Do you really think he won't kill anyone and anything that threatens his mother? He blatantly told me that he doesn't want his friends to see what he's going to do. Chad stared straight ahead, his mind elsewhere. He was back in Soul Society, trying to save his abuelo. El Brazo Izquierda del Diablo. The smell of blood and death lingered in the air, corpses littering the ground from Lemur, talking to his abuelo afterwards. Flashback. This Kurosaki Ichigo, if his family had been taken by Aizen's forces, and tortured to demoralize him, how would he react? Oscar asked pointedly. Knowing that his abuelo was trying to teach him once more, Chad thought hard about the scenario. I think he would snap, he finally said. Ichigo would unleash his full power and kill them all in a dark rage, or die trying. End flashback. Chad forced himself back to the present, perfect comprehension cruelly making itself known. It killed him not to be by Ichigo's side during this trial, but Chad understood his best friend's intentions. He was trying to spare them the fear they would feel witnessing him at his darkest, the nightmares from wondering if anything else would enrage Ichigo to the point of transforming him into the murderous beast, the horror of realizing that Ichigo was in full control during every horrible thing he deemed necessary to save his mother. We should remain here, Chad proposed, silencing everyone else in the room. We should abide by Ichigo's wishes. How can you say that? Inoue asked disbelievingly. He needs us. He needs us to stay here in order for him to do what he feels has to be done, Chad corrected. Everyone has something that they cannot tolerate. Even Ichigo. Right now, Ichigo cannot tolerate his mother being held captive by a powerful member of the Gote 13. There's no way to know whether she did it on orders from her boss. And if that's the case, Ichigo will kill everyone responsible. How can you know that? Rukia questioned quietly. Chad considered how to answer for a few moments. He could confess that he'd killed his abuelo's tormentors, but he wasn't comfortable with revealing that. He could simply say that he'd known Ichigo for a long time, but that made it sound like Ichigo was occasionally capable of murder, and he didn't want that. Finally, he decided on an answer, and simply shrugged. It's his family. Wouldn't you kill to protect those you call family? The others took on varying expressions of pensive self-analysis. Inoue nodded quietly, obviously remembering Baragan. Rukia and Renji glanced at each other, and nodded in sync. Ishida took the longest, but he finally nodded assent as well. I suppose I understand a little why Kurosaki-kun wants us to stay here, Inoue slowly acknowledged. But if it were me, if my brother were the one captured, I don't know what I'd do, but I'd want my friends with me to help. That's because you're a pacifist, or a hime, Ishida pointed out in a gentler tone than normal. But, We all saw Kurisaki's resurrection. A pronounced silence fell upon the room as each of them recalled the terrifying form Ichigo had assumed. Thick blood-red patterns adorning bone-white skin, wicked curved horns atop a nightmarish mask, claw-like hands and talon-like feet, and a hollow hole. All I'm saying is that if Ichigo doesn't want us to come, then I think it's likely he's going to use it again. He doesn't want us to think him a monster. Finally, Ichigo was forced to admit that he couldn't find his mother's Reiatsu, nor Soifen's, anywhere. Frustratedly scowling, the wizard opened his eyes and checked the sun. It was approaching noon. Glancing around once more, Ichigo saw someone running towards him. Scowling, he drew Zangetsu. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am Norun Morosuke," the man wheezed. "I was ordered to deliver this message to Kurosaki Ichigo at noon here." Ichigo growled angrily. "Another message? That's me. Hand it over." Almost snatching the paper from the hapless messenger's hands, the wizard's eyes scanned over it. "Kurosaki Ichigo, perform the following tasks. As before, failure to comply will result in your mother's immediate banishment to hell. Leave your Zanpakuto and hollow mask at Sokyoku Hill. Remove any tracking or listening devices you may have on you. I will know if you have not. Keep your Reiatsu undetectable, and make your way to the West 4th District by 1 p.m. There is a bar there known as the Hero's Hold. Enter it, and look for a blond man wearing blue. He will give you your next message, and proof that Kurosaki Masaki yet resides in this world." Ichigo scowled upon completion of the note. "Zangetsu. How far can I summon you from? I am always with you. Call me, and I will come to you, one way or another." Reassured, Ichigo promptly stabbed Zangetsu into the ground, the cloth on the end trailing in the wind. Drawing his Jillian mask, he placed it atop the sword and stepped back. He took off the devices Mayuri had lent him easily, and as he set them down as well, the wizard realized, hold on. If it's Soifen, how would she know whether I kept my tracking or listening devices? Does she have someone in the 12th division? Ichigo privately thought that was unlikely. Mayuri would never tolerate it. Or is there some sort of technology detecting Kido or something? Wishing once again that he had better knowledge of Kido, Ichigo had no choice but to do as the kidnapper wished. Completely ignoring the still recovering messenger, Ichigo shunpoed away. Leaving through the west gate, he looked to the side and noted Jidanbo, the keeper of the west gate, was looking at him curiously. "Hey, Jidanbo." Recognizing his voice at last, Jidanbo broke into a smile. "Kurosaki Ichigo, it has been a while. I do hope you didn't have to break back in. Somehow I don't think my axes would be much challenge to you anymore." "No, I didn't have to break in," Ichigo reassured him. "Wish I could stay and chat, but," he turned a serious look outwards. "There's something I really have to do." "Ah, a mission," Jidanbo realized, before nodding. "I get it, time sensitive and all that. I won't keep ya." "Thanks, Jidanbo." Ichigo vanished once more, flickering up into the air and then forward at high speed. Now that he was outside the Seraiti, he could walk on air just like in the living world. After a few minutes, he landed softly, though to those nearby it would seem as though he had simply materialized. Approaching a random shopkeeper, Ichigo did not have the time to be choosy. The substitute quickly asked, "Sorry, I'm a bit lost. Am I in the 4th district?" "You're close. This is the 3rd district," the shop owner corrected. "Just a few more minutes walk though. Any place in particular you're looking for?" "The Hero's Hold. I'm meeting someone there." "Ah, not a bad bar. That's closer to the 5th district. Might take you close to an hour, though, unless you got that fancy shunpo." "Just point me in the right direction," Ichigo urged. Obligingly, the shopkeeper pointed in the appropriate direction, further west, of course. "Thanks." Once again, Ichigo disappeared. "HMPH," the shopkeeper grumbled, turning around and cleaning up his stall a bit. "Youngsters, always in a hurry. It's not like we're gonna die anytime soon. This is a peaceful district." Several minutes later, Ichigo stood in front of the Hero's Hold. Stepping inside briskly, Ichigo recalled the instructions and scanned the bar. Sure enough, in the corner there was a young man who appeared in his mid to late 20s, with short blonde hair and a blue kimono. He was sipping some sake, and met Ichigo's eyes unflinchingly as the wizard stalked over to him and sat across from the blonde. Glancing at the time, the stranger whistled lowly. You made good time. I don't care about that. Where is my mother? Ichigo questioned firmly. I don't know, the man admitted. All I know was that I was paid a good amount of money to be here, and give you this package if you arrived before 1 o'clock. He reached down to his side and slid a packet across the table. Taking it, Ichigo quickly opened it. Inside was a familiar-looking orb, and another paper. He quickly skimmed through the new message. Kurosaki Ichigo. The orb is infused with a Kido that will allow you to view your mother by inserting a small amount of your Raryoku into it. Please note that large amounts may break the device, and if that happens, it will not be replaced. This will serve as your evidence that she is still in this dimension, and that she has been left unharmed. Now that you have received your proof, it is time to get down to business. Simply put, you are a danger to the status quo of Soul Society. So, the solution is to remove you. Your task, Kurosaki Ichigo, is to disappear. Completely. You are to go beyond the bounds of civilization and live alone, never contacting anyone, for the rest of your existence. In return, your mother shall be released, her memory wiped of her time in captivity, and monitored. Should you attempt to contact civilization, your mother will be recaptured and immediately sent to hell. We will know whether you are adhering to the rules. Once again, there was no signature, which was really pissing Ichigo off. It was aggravating enough to be blatantly ordered around, but to not even know who was pulling his strings was simply outrageous. Worse, Ichigo felt that if he could just get the orb back to the Gote 13, someone would be able to determine where it came from. He'd never come across an object that could cast specialized Kido before, outside of the Shiba's Cannonball Barrier Orb. He stiffened. Wait, Ichigo looked again at the orb that was included in the package. Now that he thought about it, the artifact did heavily resemble the Shiba's Barrier Orb. It even operated similarly, just inserting Reiatsu into it triggered the effect. No way, Ichigo thought in horror. No way would Kukaku or Ganju do this to me. Not unless they had been trapped or forced into making this. Who could do that to them? They move all the time, and Kukaku would have raised holy hell if something happened to Ganju. Ichigo, you have no time to sit and contemplate your situation, Zangetsu warned, breaking Ichigo from his musings. You must move. Right. The wizard stood abruptly, surprising his partner at the table. I have to go. Dashing out the door, he leapt up into the air and flickered out of sight, heading west. Ichigo, Byakuya and Yamamoto are at Sokyoku Hill and are speculating why you left me there. They are close to the truth. You must move more quickly if you wish to keep to the order not to contact anyone. Ichigo snorted bitterly. I can't imagine that it'd be hard to imagine my situation. Wait. You're there. There's no way anyone has seen your materialized form outside of me and Yoruichi. Is it possible for me to manifest you wherever your sword is? It is possible. What would you have me do, once I am manifested? Startled by the question, Ichigo almost stumbled in midair before regaining his balance. It was a good question. After several moments' private consideration, he nodded to himself. What we need to know is who is behind this. We can't plan any measures to save my mother until we know where she is, and the best way to find that out is to know who planned it. Looking at the clues we have, we know that the notes thus far have been written in Soifin's handwriting, according to Byakuya and Yamamoto. Soifin has suspiciously gone missing. However, the second note revealed knowledge of the tracking devices. Granted, that could have been a lucky or educated guess, but how would the culprit know if I kept one, especially the one wrapped in Sekiseki stone? Mayuri didn't seem like the kind of person to allow someone else's subordinate to work in his lab, so unless he simply didn't know, that rules out Soifin and instead suggests Mayuri and good planning. It can't be out of his ability to duplicate someone else's handwriting given a sample. But the last note wanted me absolutely gone, and our meeting with Mayuri this morning indicated that he wanted me to stay so he could research an experiment on me. So it can't be him, and I can't imagine that knowledge of how to send someone to hell would be distributed to non-Taicho, Ichigo reasoned. Have you considered that the writer may simply be lying about being able to detect the tracking devices? It is a simple intuitive leap to assume that you would carry them, given that you are allied with the Gote 13. Yeah, but without some way to check, we have to assume everything that was written is true, Ichigo pointed out. For all we know, they might not even have the ability to send Mom to hell. But we can't take the risk. His eyes were drawn to a forest as he passed overhead in his shunpo, and he decided to pause for a moment and try to re-examine his situation. Landing on a rather thick, gnarled branch of one of the trees, Ichigo noted that he was out of sight of any civilians, so he took out the latest note again, rereading it and spotting something of interest. Whoever is behind this, he's doing this because he wants to maintain the status quo of Soul Society. Not the status quo of the Gote 13, or of the balance between worlds, Ichigo thought aloud. Just of Soul Society. That probably means whoever he is, the bastard was affected by the recent changes to the Central 46. Might even be on the new Central 46 himself. Damn it, as if this wasn't complicated enough already. Now even if I get the bastard, I'll probably have the Gote 13 gunning for me anyways. Ichigo rubbed his temples, getting a headache. I hate politics, he decided. Use the artifact, Zangetsu suggested. Perhaps you will see other clues. Mentally agreeing with the recommendation, Ichigo pulled out the orb and, following the note's words of caution, put in as little Raryoku as he could into it. It immediately shone bright white before displaying a very lifelike 3D image in the air above it, picturing his mother and her surroundings, in full color and apparently in real time. Masaki appeared to be sitting down on a simple bed in a comfortable-looking stone room, reading a book. The room was apparently lit by a light fixture on the ceiling. Strangely, Ichigo could not see a door. There must be one somewhere. She's got to eat, doesn't? No, Ichigo cut himself off. She doesn't need food, not unless she develops power of her own. She could be held indefinitely. Damn it. This also explains why we could not sense her earlier. That stone must be Sekiseki. Ichigo nodded. It was a reasonable conclusion. But that much Sekiseki, it has to have come from somewhere, and unless they just tore it from the wall, which I doubt, there has to be a record of it somewhere. That'll be your task. Find where someone could acquire enough Sekiseki to make a room like that. If we find that, we'll have a lead to go on. Understood. Be warned. While I am absent, you will be unable to use Bankai, and your power will regenerate extremely slowly. Use wisdom in future use of Raryoku. Got it. Ichigo focused hard on manifesting Zangetsu back at Sokyoku Hill, envisioning it, willing it to happen. Then he felt the perpetually calm spirit of his blade leave his soul, and Ichigo smiled tightly. It had taken a large chunk of his power to manifest Zangetsu so far away from himself. Looks like I have my soul to myself for a while, he quipped as he shook his head and jumped out of his tree, ready to move on. Zangetsu was slightly disoriented as he materialized on Sokyoku Hill, but even so he recovered quickly. He'd been given a mission by his wielder, and Ichigo was counting on him. Who are you? A very familiar voice demanded sternly from behind him. Effortlessly picking up the cleaver that had been driven into the ground, Zangetsu turned around. Affecting an almost unnoticeable smirk, he turned to face the leader of the Kuchiki. I am Zangetsu. Why were you left here? Yamamoto intoned quietly. It seemed impossible, but if Kurosaki had been defeated. A messenger delivered the next message from whomever kidnapped Ichigo's mother. One of the commands was to leave my physical form behind. I have come here on Ichigo's command. An object with the ability to project Kurosaki Masaki's current surroundings revealed that she is within a windowless room with no visible method of entry, Zangetsu reported. We suspect the walls are made of Sekiseki. However, Ichigo is unable to continue the investigation in person due to the final condition for Masaki's continued safety. He must not come into contact with any civilization. He is currently heading west, looking for an area to reside until a plan is established. He has charged me with finding where large amounts of Sekiseki may be acquired. How long can he maintain your manifestation? Byakuya queried calmly. Indefinitely. I am not fighting to remain in Ichigo's inner world, as Bankai has already been achieved, and Ichigo's soul is strong enough to support prolonged separation. Zangetsu narrowed his eyes behind his tinted glasses at the Taicho of the 6th Division. Now that I have answered your questions, perhaps you can answer mine. Where could a noble acquire large amounts of Sekiseki? Why do you suspect a noble? Yamamoto countered with a low rumble. That is irrelevant, but in the interests of maintaining a working relationship, I shall answer, Zangetsu acquiesced reluctantly. The notes we were given indicate that the writer or writers were impacted by the abrupt change to the Central 46 that Kyoraku Shunsui implemented recently. Given what is known of Central 46's election procedures, and the artifact delivered to Ichigo, the signs are clear. It is likely that at least one noble family is involved. Now, I repeat, where could a noble acquire large amounts of sekiseki? Sekiseki can be purchased in small quantities from known dealers in the Seraiti, and from black markets throughout the Rukongai, Byakuya answered, his expression not changing in the slightest. For larger quantities, a noble family must do business with the Pokir family. The Pokir family was charged by the Spirit King to manufacture sekiseki and safeguard the secrets of its development. A law was later implemented that the Pokir must report all such transactions to the Central 46 where the information will be entered into the Dairishokiro. I see. Then I require permission to view the Dairishokiro records of recent sekiseki transactions, Zangetsu stated flatly, his shaded eyes turning to meet Yamamoto's slits. You will need to go through the Central 46 to acquire such permission, Yamamoto replied, opening his eyes slightly to convey his seriousness. My students' action regarding the Central 46 only impacts their abilities to make critical decisions such as declaring war. Access to the Dairishokiro is not classified as such, and may only be granted by the Central 46. Zangetsu's face tightened. If what we suspect is true, I will not receive it. If I find myself without options, I will return to Ichigo, and I believe he will carry out his threat from this morning. The top of Yamamoto's cane smoldered, throwing off a few stray sparks around his hands as it threatened to burst into flame and reveal the true form of Ryujin Jaka. He will find it harder than he thinks to defeat me. Ichigo doesn't have to defeat you, Zangetsu replied, tightening his grip on his blade. Your powers clashing would create a cataclysm that would serve Ichigo's purpose just as well, a vivid demonstration of power, and a statement that he will not tolerate anything happening to his friends and family, even if it means fighting the most powerful Shinigami in the Gote 13. If you truly wish to prevent a war between the Gote 13 and Kurosaki Ichigo, you must aid us. Why should the afterlife bow to a mere child's desire? Yamamoto asked dangerously. Why should a man not destroy that which continues to do him wrong? Zangetsu riposted. Tell me, Yamamoto, what would you do if the situation were reversed? What would you do if some unknown force successfully captured one of your loved ones and threatened to banish him or her to hell unless you did as ordered for the rest of your days? Would you let that person be destroyed to continue your duty as your position dictates, and eventually catch the villain in the end? Or would you, whatever it took, even reduce all creation to ash, to rescue your loved one as your heart commands? I do not have the luxury of acting on solely my behalf. Yamamoto growled. I am Sotaicho of the Gote 13. Regardless of my feelings, my actions must reflect my duties and responsibilities. If I do not obey the law, what sort of example is that to all those under me? If you are strong, the rules do not apply. I cannot simply abandon everything. The one can never come before the many. Zangetsu scoffed. What kind of example is it to abandon those you care for? Ichigo would tear the very skies asunder to protect those he claims as his. He is unafraid to blacken the night, to make everyone fear that he will hunt and consume them under the pale light of the moon, if it will safeguard those he cares for. And he will do just that if given no other choice. He lifted his Shikai blade, pointing it directly at Yamamoto challengingly. You have three choices, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. Help us, step aside, or draw your blade and stop me by force, because I will not back down, I will not abandon the ideals that my wielder holds within his heart. Chapter 42, Helpless. Byakuya stepped between Yamamoto and Zangetsu's standoff, calm and collected as always. This confrontation is unnecessary. Kurosaki Masaki was captured while being escorted by a Kuchiki representative. This is a severe blow to the Kuchiki credibility, one that must not go unanswered. In light of the current situation, Zangetsu, I wish to hire your wielder to continue the investigation as he sees fit. The amount to be paid may be negotiated at a later date. Is this acceptable? Zangetsu's eyes did not leave Yamamoto's. It is. Nodding, Byakuya turned to the Sotaicho. The investigator the Kuchiki has hired has uncovered evidence that implicates one or more noble families. Due to the delicate nature of the relationships between noble families, and the newly discovered possibility of corruption within the Central 46 that would hinder the investigation, the Kuchiki requests aid from the Gote 13. Yamamoto's Reiatsu lowered significantly. Very well, let us go to the Central 46. Should they decline to help, as I have been requested by the head of one of the 4 noble families to aid in an ongoing investigation, I shall declare martial law. Zangetsu lowered his blade and nodded silently. I must call for an emergency meeting of the Central 46, Yamamoto continued. I shall meet you at the entrance to the Central 46 Assembly Hall. Kuchiki Taicho, you will escort Kurisaki's Zanpakuto there. Hi, Byakuya accepted. Yamamoto promptly turned on his heel and Shunpo-ed away. Byakuya began walking down the path away from Sokyoku Hill. Zangetsu joined him a moment later, his sword vanishing into reishi that were quickly absorbed by the sword spirit. You have my thanks, and my wielders, he said quietly to Byakuya as they began walking in the appropriate direction. The 6th Division Taicho looked at him regally. I am merely doing my duty, he replied coolly. Part of Kurosaki Ichigo's role as investigator is to keep me informed of all pertinent information to the case. Tell me of the artifact you mentioned. As you wish. The artifact is an orb that appears similarly to an orb given to my wielder by the Shiba. The Shiba orb was used to break through the spiritual barrier around the Seraiti, whereas this orb displays Kurosaki Masaki's current surroundings. Both merely require the insertion of Raryoku to create the effect, Zangetsu summarized. I assume you have not investigated the Shiba yet. No, the artifact was given to Ichigo with the message that he could not contact any civilization. An additional issue is that the Shiba are difficult to locate, they move frequently, as noted by Shihoin Yoruichi. True, Byakuya acknowledged. I shall have some of my servants attempt to discover their current location. What can you tell me about the handwriting of the messages? The handwriting is still the same as the first, which you and Yamamoto say belongs to Soifun. Byakuya gave Zangetsu a glance out of the corner of his eye. I see you share the same disposition towards suffixes as your wielder. Zangetsu inclined his head, but said nothing in return, and the two of them continued towards the assembly hall in silence. Ichigo frowned. Zangetsu wasn't kidding about slow Raryoku recovery, he muttered. He had hardly regained any since he'd materialized the sword spirit. Repeated Shunpo use had gotten him much further, almost to the West 50th district, but it had also drained him enough that even Ichigo could feel the difference. The wizard had a feeling the only reason he was regaining any power at all was because his hollow side could feed on the power lingering in the air. I could also eat something, I guess, but I don't know what is and isn't edible in a forest, and I'm not allowed to go shopping, not that I have any money that Soul Society would accept. Just then, his stomach rumbled. He hadn't even eaten breakfast, and now it was well past noon and Ichigo was dealing with power depletion. Great, as if I needed more problems. That's just not fair. But Ichigo would not call Zangetsu back. The Zanpakuto was busy doing what Ichigo had asked. Sighing, the substitute Shinigami decided to descend to the ground and walk for a bit to try to find an isolated spot that he could stay in for the time being. If it was just Raryoku, I would go to Hueco Mundo, Ichigo thought bitterly. But I don't know what'd happen if I did that while Zangetsu's here, and I don't want to risk anything happening. Plus, opening a garganta would definitely be detected. He sighed as he landed on the soil of the forest floor, shaking his head. No, I have to stay somewhere in Soul Society. Hurry, Zangetsu. Something wrong, Ichigo. Ichigo nearly jumped out of his skin before turning around to see a black cat. Yoruichi. Who did you expect? No one, that's the point. Ichigo sighed, before remembering the situation. Quick, get away. If I'm detected talking to anyone then Mom'll be sent to hell. Then you won't be talking to anyone, Yoruichi sounded rather smug. I'm a cat remember, you'll just be talking to yourself. Ichigo breathed a sigh in relief. Alright then, just keep your voice down, okay. I'm not sure yet how they're tracking me, though I'm sure they are, somehow. Yoruichi jumped onto Ichigo's shoulder and lowered her voice appropriately. So, fill me in. Kazuki told me your mother was captured and the threat about hell. Ichigo quickly related the events of the day. So, I've got Zangetsu materialized and trying to find out where a noble could get that much sekiseki. You say the orb looks like the Shiba's variety. Show me. Make it look like you're just going to look at your mother again. Yoruichi's voice was little more than a whisper. Ichigo did as bid and channeled the barest amounts of power he could into it, triggering the image. Masaki had set down the book and was instead writing in a journal. Peering closer at it, Ichigo could barely make out what she was writing. She'd apparently been at it for a bit, as the page was full of notes. Of all things, it seemed to be a letter to him. Ichigo, I don't know when you'll be able to read this, but my captors told me that you'd be able to see me in my surroundings whenever you use something they gave you. I hope it's clear enough for you to read this. Just in case it is, I'm writing this to tell you everything I know in the hopes that you'll be able to use it somehow to find me. I don't know who captured me, unfortunately, and I was blindfolded until I got in this room. I still don't know how I got into this room. I can't find any doors or windows or secret latches from this side. But they must be getting in somehow, as the books and journal wasn't here when I first arrived. The walls are thick enough that I can't hear anything from in here. The silence alone is enough to drive someone insane, but the note I found on top of the book says that I'll be released within a few days, assuming you do as they say. Ichigo, if you're reading this, I hope they aren't making you do something terrible. I can't imagine you to have many enemies, so hopefully there's not many to search through. The only ones who knew where I live now were the Kuchiki, and the Barine noble families, along with your friend Urahara. I told Kuchiki Byakuya myself, and he doesn't seem upset with you, so I don't think it's them. I don't know how the Barine family found me, but they did and told me they were in charge of safeguarding forbidden knowledge and using their records to provide advice for the Central 46 when they need expert opinions. They wanted to update their records on Shinigami Hollow hybrids, but now I'm not sure if that was all they were after. Masaki had paused there for a bit, tapping on the desk lightly as she thought, which gave Ichigo plenty of time to read what she'd written thus far. Finally, she sighed and wrote down one more thing. I hope that helps. I'll write more if I think of anything else. Good luck, Ichigo. With that, Masaki stood from the desk, leaving the letter open just in case, and moved to the bed and lay down. She looked at the ceiling with a strange expression that Ichigo had never seen on her face before. It wasn't fear, nor was it hope. It was more like, I bet she feels so helpless right now, Yoruichi murmured, unable to do anything but wait. Yeah, helpless is the word for it, Ichigo agreed silently. Without a word, he turned off the projector. I can see how you would think this is a Shiba-style Kido orb, but I can tell you that's not the case, Yoruichi told him a few moments later. The Shiba specialize in fireworks and earth-based Kido, as you probably recall, and their barrier orb was originally created to shield them from accidents. The barrier itself is relatively mid-level, but the infusion into easily used objects took prodigious skill. Such skill, in fact, that they had to have them commissioned from the Kido Corps until they learned how to do it themselves. In comparison, what we just saw was an extremely difficult, high-level spell that bypasses even Sekiseki. Very few people indeed could have made that orb, and they would almost certainly know who it went to. Can you find them? Yoruichi smacked Ichigo's ear with a paw, making him hiss and instinctively reach up for his abused sensory organ. The black cat jumped gracefully to the ground. Who do you take me for, Ichigo? She hissed softly, but more teasing than anything else. I was the leader of the Onmitsukido, and head of the Shihoin. I can find anything and anyone. Don't get into trouble while I'm gone. With that, she sauntered away through the forest easily. Ichigo sighed again, but this time in appreciation. Thanked Kami for friends in high places. Maybe this'll be resolved quickly. And then, his fists clenched as he contemplated what he'd do when he knew who was responsible. They'll pay most dearly. Zangetsu and Byakuya finally arrived at the entrance to the assembly hall, where they waited patiently for Yamamoto's arrival. Several minutes later, he appeared in front of them in a flurry of shunpo, where he promptly pushed open the doors and walked in. His companions followed silently. Inside, there was an obvious place for them to stand to address the council, and they did so. Zangetsu took the opportunity to surreptitiously look around. There was little light, and where the members were sitting, there were plaques numbering from 1 to 46 obscuring sight of their faces. Why have you called this emergency session of the Central 46? One of them asked. Zangetsu was unable to tell whom, which he supposed was the point. He stepped forward to address the query. I request access to the Darishokairo, to view recent records of sekiseki purchases made through the Pokir family. And how is this an emergency? A different voice demanded critically. And who are you? You do not dress as a Shinigami. I am not a Shinigami, but I have been hired by the Kuchiki family to investigate the matter of a kidnapping and assault, Zangetsu replied strongly, not bothering to answer the latter question. Murmurs arose from the circle of unknown Central 46 members. Kidnapping and assault, on the Kuchiki, a third voice whispered disbelievingly. Kuchiki Byakuya, elaborate on this man's testimony. Byakuya inclined his head. Very well. One of the Kuchiki servants was escorting an esteemed guest. They were assaulted, and his charge kidnapped. The investigation indicates that my guest, whom I wish to remain anonymous at this time, is being held in a location surrounded by sekiseki. I require access to the records to determine potential leads to the investigation. There was silence for a moment, and then an old man's voice rang out with the weight of authority. I believe I speak for the Central 46 when I say that such an act against a noble family cannot be tolerated. It is our job as the government to aid the members of our society, and such a situation is exactly the reason why those records exist at all. I move that we allow Kuchiki Byakuya and his investigator access to the sekiseki records. If any among our esteemed members disagree, let them speak now. I disagree, a decidedly younger man's voice called out immediately. Zangetsu made careful note of his voice, wanting to be able to identify it later should he hear it again. I find myself suspicious, Kuchiki Byakuya. Why would you disguise the identity of your guest, when it is your guest that you are attempting to rescue from a supposed imprisonment? How do we know that this guest is not an enemy of Soul Society? The air tangibly grew thicker with Reiatsu, though Byakuya's expression did not change. I suggest being more careful with your words, councilman, he uttered in a volume only just above a whisper, yet the words echoed in the chamber. For I do not tolerate fools who dare to accuse me of betraying Soul Society. I am head of the Kuchiki, and Taicho of the 6th Division of the Gote 13. And you should all be intimately aware of how little effort it requires for a Taicho to eliminate that which we do not tolerate. The threat and reference to Aizen's massacre of the previous Central 46 sent the room once more into silence. Zangetsu half expected Yamamoto to have intervened or countermanded the noble, but there was silence. He allowed himself a half-smirk before raising his voice to address the hidden members before him. Are there any other objections? I ask solely so we can get to the point. This investigation is something of a time-sensitive matter. After a few moments of silence, a more feminine voice regally spoke. It seems there are no further objections. The Central 46 grants Kuchiki Byakuya and his investigator access to the Darishokairo to access the sekiseki records. You will be monitored to ensure you do not access any further information. Byakuya gave the slightest of bows, before a door that had gone unseen in the shadows opened with a creak. Inside was a lighted path, and the noble began walking purposefully into it. Zangetsu followed a step behind him. Yamamoto silently took one more glance around the room, before quietly leaving. He was glad he did not have to enforce martial law. He hoped that this incarnation of the Central 46 would continue to display rational judgment and not go the way of the former members. Ishida paced in Ichigo's room. None of them had left, hoping that any minute Kurosaki would emerge with news one way or another. It was difficult to imagine that anything could hold him up. He'd defeated Aizen after all. But as the hours had passed, Ishida's thoughts took a darker turn. It was obvious, now that he'd thought about it. There was hardly better bait than Kurosaki's mother to draw Kurosaki back to Soul Society on short notice. Had he fallen into a trap that he was unable to leave? Ishida shivered as the memory of Kurosaki's resurrection flashed. He shook his head. No, nothing can stop Kurosaki when he's got something important on the line. Then he mentally slapped himself. I can't get involved, even if I wanted to. I swore on my Quincy pride. HMPH. It's obvious that this is taking longer than expected, Ishida pointed out. There is no point in us standing here and waiting for his return. Kurosaki will be fine, so we should enjoy what's left of our day. Ishida-kun. Inoue sounded almost scandalized in her disbelief. How can you say that? Kurosaki-kun's mother. Will be fine, Ishida insisted. And besides, even if you wanted to help, How would you get there? He pointed out harshly. You can't enter the Senkaimon the way Kuchiki and Abarai can. You'd need matter reishi converters, remember? And the only one we know of is with Urahara, hundreds of miles away. On top of that, Soifun is the suspect, and none of us save I could possibly match Soifun in sheer speed and brutal efficiency, and I'm already sworn to focus on the living world. Ishida reminded them. Face it, there's nothing we can do but have faith in Kurosaki. He will return victorious, and we will deal with the fallout later. Right now, it's pointless to just sit around waiting. In fact, he added almost as an afterthought, we're hurting him by staying here. By all of us staying here, we're drawing attention, and if they decide to check in on us, they're going to find no reason for it with Khan in his body. The best thing we can do for him is go out, try to relax a bit, and hope he comes back before dinner. There was a moment of silence following Ishida's sudden rant, before Renji sighed. I don't like it, but he's right, he admitted. We'll feel a Senkaimon or a Garganta appear anyway, and Ichigo doesn't have to come back to this room. Inoue bit her lip. She hated not being to help. But despite wanting to run off and help Kurosaki-kun with all her being, she knew that the Quincy was right. With a struggle, she put on a fake cheerful grin, closing her eyes in a way that she hoped looked happy so the others wouldn't see how conflicted she felt. Right, she chirped. Kurosaki-kun will be fine. Come on, Rukia, let's go get our swimsuits. Rukia reluctantly let herself be dragged away, but not before exchanging a significant look with Renji. Neither of them were happy about the situation, but Rukia knew that if history was any indicator, Ichigo was about to get into a lot of trouble. And if something could give Ichigo trouble now that he had transcended the existence of Shinigami. Renji heaved a mental sigh. I had hoped that things would quiet down after Aizen died. Should have known better. With Ichigo, things will never be calm, will they? Urahara sighed, having just purified another hollow. He, Ururu, Tessai and Jinta had been out all day, purifying hollows. There was something going on, and his vast intellect was trying to determine what it could be. The attacks were all by weak hollows, and they didn't seem to be coordinated in any one place. It was obviously a distraction, but by whom? And for what purpose? And then his keen senses picked up that not quite hollow that had been popping up. Well, that answers that question. Shunpo-ing quickly over, he took a good look at the intruder. As expected, it did not appear to be a hollow. Instead, the entity seemed to be garbed in a black cloak with white rectangular buttons, and a strange light bulb-like mask. The mask almost made Urahara conclude it was a hollow variant, but the mask did not appear to have a mouth, and the mask itself was whole, so it was unlikely to be an Arrancar either. But there was that nagging sense of familiarity as well. Deciding to simply ask the creature and hopefully get some answers, Urahara jumped down in front of the entity right before it could try to kill the terrified man it had been hunting. Hello there, he greeted cheerfully. And who might you be? You're not her, the creature said in disappointment. I could have sworn hunting would bring out that girl again. Oh well, you'll make a good test too. He raised his arm, making something metallic clink underneath his cloak, and fired something out of it. Urahara Shunpo-ed up on top of the building to his side instinctually, avoiding having a dozen strange slug-like things land on him, where they promptly exploded. He frowned. That reminded him of something. Yar, I was hoping for a civil conversation too. You're fast, the being complimented in a way that sounded too much like Kenpachi for Urahara to be comfortable. Maybe you'll be a better challenge than I thought, while I wait for that orange-haired boy and that bitch. That was more than enough information for Urahara to finish connecting the dots. I would think that I'd be a challenge for a hollow that was sent to hell already, Urahara rebuked, drawing Benihime. How did you escape from hell, Shrieker? Shrieker laughed. That's for me to know, and you to guess at. But I'm out, and it's time to test my newfound power. I don't think so, Urahara decided, his voice cool. Bakudo 63, Raikujokuro. Shrieker suddenly found himself bound in place with 6 bars of light holding him still. But he began laughing. You really think you've won? Urahara's eyes widened minutely as he leapt away from where he'd been standing, just before it exploded. But the air was filled with more of those blasted leeches. Shrieker cackled as the air exploded far better than any fireworks display he'd ever cared to see. And the bars of light vanished as well, which simply was enough for Shrieker to think that that fight was over. Now then, where was I? Dead. Urahara materialized right behind him, Benihime already mid-swing. Shrieker ducked, and vanished in his own high-speed technique. Urahara's eyes narrowed as he considered the new data and decided on a new plan. He tracked Shrieker easily. His eyes were trained to follow the likes of Yoruichi, the goddess of flash, and aimed quickly. Hado 4. Byakurai. Lightning flashed, and in the bright light Urahara disappeared and reappeared above Shrieker, silent as the assassin he used to be, and swung down with Benihime. Easily slicing into the cloak and feeling it connect with flesh, Urahara was certain that he'd finish the hell-bound soul momentarily as Shrieker was sent screaming towards the ground. But then a strange red swirling portal appeared underneath him, and he sank into it, his screams transforming into laughter. "Fool!" The damned soul called out triumphantly. "I'll come back and get my revenge." And then he was gone. Urahara landed lightly on another building. Now he had the answers he had sought, but they only gave more questions. He frowned pensively. Somehow, someway, souls bound to hell had found a way to leave. He needed to get in contact with Mayuri and coordinate resources. This was bigger than either of them, and both of their formidable intellects would have to work together to find how the residents of hell could escape, and then eliminate that possibility. There was precious little time. There would surely be some truly terrifying souls who would take the chance to return to the living world. Just then, a hollow appeared on his spiritual sense, and Urahara let loose a rare curse. Reaching into his robes, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed as he shunpo-ed to the newcomer and slaughtered it in an instant. "This is Kazuki. Tessai, something's come up. I need you and the kids to take care of the hollows for the time being. I need to get in contact with the Gote 13. "Understood, sir. Thank you." And then Urahara flickered away back to the shop, down to the basement, and began to make an interdimensional call with the equipment he'd stored there just in case such an emergency happened. The call connected, and the video brought Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni on screen. "Urahara Kazuki. Yamamoto Sotaicho. We have a problem. The Togabito have found a way out." In the shadows of another dimension, a young man with dark purple hair worn in a long fringe looked up to see someone else approaching. Though the figure was shrouded in the darkness as well, the first man allowed himself a smirk as he recognized his companion. "The mission was a success, I assume." "Yes, Shuren. I have already disposed of Shrieker," the newcomer answered, his voice subservient but proud. "Excellent, Gonjo. We will soon make our move. Gather the others and be ready to enter the living world by tonight." "As you command." The shrouded figure bowed and faded back into the shadows. Shuren smiled in triumph as he held up a lantern that glowed with the image of a mask with twisted, forward-pointed horns as a Sero fired itself from it. "Kurosaki Ichigo, you will soon free us." Chapter 43. Hell on Earth. Ichigo sat in the uninhabited woods he'd found, bitterly clenching and unclenching his hands. He longed to be out there finding whoever had the audacity to abduct his mother, but he was helpless unless he wished to doom Masaki to hell. He sighed, bringing one knee to his chest. He hated simply sitting around when there was something important happening. What happens if we can't find that person? Would I have to stay here in Soul Society, forever unable to talk to anyone? Would I have to abandon my life as a human? No one would ever be able, or allowed to find me. Ichigo looked at the sky. A lonely existence. Was this what you gave the Hogyoku to me for, Aizen? Did you predict something like this would happen? Sighing, Ichigo steadied his resolve. He knew that his mother would be released in a few days, and then there would be no way to tell who the culprit was. Should that happen, Ichigo knew that he would have to abide by his orders. Despite his threat to Yamamoto earlier, Ichigo knew he wasn't emotionally capable of slaughtering all of Soul Society. Yet, the substitute Shinigami finished with closed eyes. It was almost an echo from Cazador de la Luna. Ichigo had to be truthful if only to himself. He knew there were circumstances that would drive him to such atrocities. One had only to look at his resurrection to know that there were no limits Ichigo would not break to protect everyone he held dear. But he hoped from the bottom of his heart that it would never come to that. Ichigo sighed again and allowed himself to rest. His internal philosophical session had left him emotionally drained, and hopefully a little nap would help recover his Raryoku faster. Yoruichi watched the Shinigami carefully from atop the branch she stood on. Below her was the Kido core, and she was waiting for her opportunity to slip into the library to look the records. It didn't seem like much had changed from her time as head of the Onmitsu Kido, which was fortunate for her. The building itself was separate from the others, a safety precaution given how many Kido experiments went on in the hidden complex. The top was made of glass, allowing Yoruichi a perfect look inside. She'd found out once that it was a purely aesthetic touch to the library, as a project to allow natural sunlight to illuminate the library so it would have a more natural feeling. Of course, the glass had been spelled to be nigh unbreakable. Glancing at the sun through the boughs of the tree, she noted it was fast approaching time for dinner. Perfect. It didn't take long before she spotted the librarian calmly walk outside and lock the door, before binding it with multiple silent bakudo. The door glowed a multitude of colors. The spells took effect, effectively protecting from anyone who could not break such a combination of high-level bakudo. Yoruichi rolled her eyes as the librarian left, apparently satisfied with his precautionary measures. Fool, there's more ways to enter the building than just a door. Leaping down from her tree, Yoruichi casually strolled over to one side of the building, and without a second thought broke one of the side windows with a swift kick. Quickly jumping inside, Yoruichi transformed back into her human self. She had to work quickly, and that meant she needed human dexterity. Ignoring her nudity as was her custom, it did not take her long to locate where the records were kept. Every time the Kido Corps was called on to use their advanced knowledge to perform Kido that were not capable of being done by anyone else, they were mandated to keep records just in case it was abused. When power is involved, accountability is everything, Yoruichi mused to herself. Yoruichi rapidly flipped through the books, looking for the orb that Ichigo carried. Time passed, until she was sure that dinner had to be over and the librarian would be on his way back. She continued, and then her eyes paused. She'd found it. Making a quick note of the page, she swept the rest of the books into her arms and hurriedly placed them back on the bookshelves where she'd found them, making sure to put them in the correct order. Yoruichi closed the record book that she'd found the answer on, and transformed back into a cat. Picking it up by the spine gently with her teeth, Yoruichi felt the bakudo dissolve. She had no time left. The librarian entered, and looked around. For a moment, he'd thought he'd felt some reiatsu, but after a few seconds, he shook his head. Must have been residual from the bakudo ending, he reasoned. He was rather tired, after all, and hadn't done a perfect job of canceling his own work. The goddess of Shunpo flickered away expertly, carrying the book. She had a ways to travel to reach Ichigo again, assuming he hadn't moved far. Upon arriving almost 20 minutes later, she discovered him on the ground, leaning against a tree in a light doze. Sighing, Yoruichi decided to let him sleep. She had no idea how much reiatsu it was taking for him to be manifesting Zangetsu for so long, and he had seemed entirely too stressed lately. With good reason, she reminded herself. Setting the book down next to Ichigo's hand, she jumped into the tree and kept lookout. Zangetsu observed calmly as Byakuya expertly found the appropriate tone from the Darishokairo and flipped to the end. Well, it seems that there are 3 noble families who have ordered a sufficiently sizable amount of sekiseki from the Pokir family within the last year, which is the earliest any nobles could have possibly learned of Kurosaki Ichigo's existence, Byakuya stated coolly. The records state that the Kasumioji are experimenting on a new weapons forging technique, the Shiba are making their home more difficult to locate, and the Barin are expanding and securing their library. Zangetsu's found himself frowning much like his wielder did so frequently. What is the Barin family known for? Byakuya gave no reaction to the question for several seconds as he gathered his thoughts. They are not known. The Barin family is rarely seen or heard from, and while they do appear at social gatherings, I do not recall anything concerning their duties as a noble household. Duties. Byakuya closed the book of records and set it on the appropriate shelf as he clarified for the Zanpakudo. The noble families are called such as the Spirit King entrusted them with responsibilities. For example, the Kuchiki family chronicles the history of Soul Society, and should we ever be called on, it is our duty to provide it to our government. I see. What of the Kasumioji, and the Shiba? The Kasumioji family was tasked with being masters of weapon forging. While the Shinigami rely almost solely on Zanpakudo and Kido, there are occasions where specialized weapons are required. The Shiba were tasked with relations to the Rukongai, and they began to specialize in fireworks. However, their status as noble house has degraded significantly since Kaian Shiba died. Zangetsu's expression remained unchanged, but he found himself wishing he was back with Ichigo. I hate politics. Nevertheless, he would not abandon Ichigo. I propose we separate and individually investigate the Kasumioji and the Barine until your servants can locate the Shiba. Byakuya nodded acknowledgement. I concur with your plan. I will speak to the head of the Kasumioji. I will assign another servant to take you to the Barine mansion. Without waiting for response, the Kuchiki head turned on his heel and left the Darishokairo. Zangetsu followed without a word. Meanwhile, back at the 1st Division HQ, Yamamoto was in a three-way conversation with two of the most dangerously intelligent Shinigami he'd ever known. Urahara, describe the Togabito that you fought. The Togabito was formerly the hollow known as Shrieker, Urahara briefed the leader of the Gote 13. He wore a full-body black covering and a plain white mask. Nevertheless, when Shrieker spoke it was without the hollow double-tone effect. I believe that the covering was somehow important to his escape, but without further knowledge of the workings of hell, I cannot be sure. Mayuri's grin could barely be contained on his face, it was so wide. Ah, but unlike you, I have been studying hell. His fingers flew across the keyboard as it pulled up the called-upon data. Reports from those who have seen Hell's Gates indicate that an entity pulls the Togabito inside, and this matches the readings in Karakura on the occasion that a hollow is damned there. It is likely the guardian of the gates, if you will, as the Reiatsu that emits from the last several times Hell's Gates have opened has been near identical. Urahara looked pensively through his viewing monitor at his Soul Society counterpart, looking at the data he'd acquired with a thoughtful hum. I see where you're going, Mayuri-kun, and I have to agree. Assuming that there's only one way out, Shrieker would have had to get past the Guardian. His outfit may have cloaked his presence and prevented the Guardian from reopening the gates and pulling him back through afterwards. We won't know for certain until one is captured and detained without the ability to retreat back to Hell, Mayuri pointed out. As we don't know how it's done, we have to assume they're like hollows in that they can open a way to Haweko Mundo from anywhere, as long as they have the power needed, Urahara mused. Which would make sense, considering that Shrieker was a hollow before being sent to Hell. Some high-level Bakudo appears to be in order. I will see what I can do, and call you again when I have more details. Very well, Yamamoto deemed before disconnecting the call, which disconnected Mayuri as well. Urahara sighed. He'd gathered some new data, thanks to his former student, but it was fairly evident that Mayuri had been stymied by Yamamoto's refusal to release classified information. And as a result, they were in the dark about how the Togabito had managed to escape. The need for security had once again trumped the ever-present desire for knowledge that all scientists had, and now it had backfired. Story of every free thinker associated with a larger organization, I would surmise. Looks like I'll need Tessai's help again. And maybe some of the Vizard to help out, but I don't know how to contact them without Ichigo, and he's off in Soul Society. Urahara made his way back up the steps unhappily, dreading going back out and having to slay more hollows. There was research to be done. But he paused right before reaching the door and sighed. You do realize I was once an assassin. You know you can't hide from me in my own shop, Soifin. From the shadows of his shop, Soifin emerged. Still facing Urahara's back, she swallowed hard. Urahara-san, I need some assistance, and I don't know who else to turn to. Oh, and why would I assist you, Soifin, when it was reported to me by Soul Society that you were the one who abducted young Kurosaki Ichigo's mother? I dare say Ichigo-kun is coming for your head, and I have half a mind to give him a ring. I would really rather not be on his bad side, Urahara commented lightly. He had no such intentions. The mere fact that Soifin had come to him was a pretty good indicator that Soifin was being framed, and was, in fact, coming to him for help clearing her name while staying under the radar for the time being. That wasn't me or my men. Soifin hissed in protest. I was framed and you know it, Urahara. I would never accept someone stupid enough to leave a note that all but proved my guilt, let alone in my handwriting. If I truly were to abduct Kurosaki Masaki to blackmail her son, I would do it in someone else's hand to throw people off my trail. You should know that Urahara, since as you so rightly pointed out, you were once an assassin too. Yar, Urahara stalled for time as he bowed his head, smirking to himself in the shadows of his hat. I love it when I'm right. So, I take it you need shelter and some aid clearing your name. I imagine Yamamoto would be more likely to interrogate you just in case. Hi, Soifun admitted grudgingly. Well, as it happens, I am in need of some help myself. Urahara said brightly. You see, it turns out that the Hell Dimension has gotten closer lately, and somehow or other its residents, the Togabito, found a way to escape to the living world. We don't know how or why, and that's where you come in. You capture one, bring it to me, and I do my thing. In return, I provide food and shelter, and light a soul society if they ask if I know where you are. I'll also let Yoruichi know what's going on so she can search on your behalf. Does that sound reasonable to you, Soifun? I hardly have a choice, now do I? Soifun muttered bitterly, but she knew it could have been far worse. All Urahara was asking was for something she'd have gladly done on an official mission from Yamamoto Sotaicho, or if Yoruichi has asked her. The Hell Dimension was not something anyone wanted a part of. Fine. How do I identify these, Togabito? Only one has appeared so far, but it can be assumed the rest will have similar characteristics. They will be humanoid, with Reiatsu very similar to that of Hollows but distinctly off, and will be wearing an all-concealing black cloak, with a white mask. Soifun looked at her benefactor disbelievingly. That's an extremely vague description. Urahara looked up with a faux surprised expression. Is it not enough information, dear Soifun? I thought you were a better assassin than I. Shut up. It's more than enough information for me to do this job where you cannot, the Onmitsukido commander spat, striding past the door and flickering away. Urahara waited a few beats to make sure she was gone before chuckling to himself. Ah, Soifun is as easy to rile up as ever. He turned around to go back to his lab. He needed to go invent a device capable of keeping a hollow from using Garganta. Theoretically, considering that both were forced rips from one dimension to another, it would work on the Togabito to keep them from retreating to hell. He'd never bothered to invent such a thing before, as up to that point, it was simply more efficient to purify the hollow before it could escape that way. But Shrieker had opened one easily, and had been in hell for a relatively short time. If he can do it that quickly, then any others that come through should be far more difficult to pin down. The natural light coming in was fading fast, indicating that the sun was beginning to set. As though that were a cue, Urahara's phone rang. Hi. Urahara Dono, we are coming back inside. Hollows have ceased to appear for several minutes, and Soifun Taicho has just arrived stating that she will take over the hollow duties for the moment. Very good. Thank you, Tessai. Let Soifun know that the forecast for tonight is heavy rain, so if she needs to dry off and get warm she is welcome to come back inside. Hi, Urahara Dono. The phone clicked as Tessai disconnected, and Urahara absently put it back in his pocket as his thoughts once more turned towards his work. Soifun watched the sun set dispassionately, replaying the events that had led to her current situation. Flashback. Soifun Taicho. The Onmitsukido commander looked up from her unending paperwork, only to see her rotund Fukuteicho looking considerably panicked, with ridiculous amounts of sweat seeping from his forehead. What is it, Omaeda? She asked wearily. It's bad, Taicho, he babbled. They're coming for you. Soifun repressed a shiver from the cold that suddenly crept up her spine. They, she asked critically. Be precise, Omaeda. Hi, Taicho. Kurosaki Masaki has been kidnapped from the supervision of one of the Kuchiki attendants, and a note was left in your handwriting incriminating you. This time, Soifun could not keep her eyes from widening in surprise and a hint of fear. I swear I will come at you with all of my power. Kurosaki is coming for me, just like he said he would. The thought chilled her bones. Omaeda, I am sending you on a priority mission. You are to hide from the Gote 13 until Kurosaki Ichigo or Shihoin Yoruichi-sama comes to you. He will interrogate you for my whereabouts. Tell him the truth, that you don't know. At that point, you are to explain what you do know concerning the investigation. My life depends on you reaching him before he reaches me. Make yourself clear that I had nothing to do with this. Do whatever you must to make that happen. Am I understood? Omaeda had paled considerably, but nodded slowly. Hi, Taicho. Soifun promptly vanished at speeds that she knew that Omaeda had no chance of following. She knew her best chance lay in following in Yoruichi-sama's footsteps, escaping Soul Society and hiding in the living world. End flashback. Soifun never thought she'd have to depend on her portly Fukutecho, but he was her best and only hope to prevent Kurosaki from slaying her in a righteous rage. I wonder how he's doing. She snorted aloud, probably cowering in fear somewhere. I should have approached one of my teams of Onmitsukido, but she knew she couldn't. They had no idea of Kurosaki's power, and would probably get themselves killed trying to subdue him. Omeda's fear for once would work in his favor. Then something undeniably wrong stabbed at her senses, and Soifun involuntarily turned around and began to shunpo towards the source. It's like a hollow, but not. Despite herself, she had to admit there truly was no good way to describe it, and that Urahara Kazuki had done his best. Then another popped up a distance away from the first, and Soifun made a sudden realization. They're coming in force. Shit. Sure enough, a third joined the first two, this one halfway across the city. Damn it, this was well planned. I need reinforcements. The last one appeared in another location further away from the rest, and they began to spread out. They're searching for something. Soifun diverted her course to attack the one closest to her. As Urahara had said, the Togabito was rather nondescript, wearing a black cloak and a white mask but otherwise humanoid. However, this one was rather gigantic, even larger than Komamura's impressive 9 feet 5 inches tall stature, and possibly twice as broad, though his gargantuan hands were almost as tall as Soifun herself and had chains attached to his wrists that rattled every time he moved. Perfect. A large target. Shunpo-ing right behind the giant, she launched a powerful aerial roundhouse kick right at his head, hoping to knock him out, bind him, and deliver him later. Her leg connected perfectly, but the Togabito was only knocked to the side a few feet. Turning to face her, he visibly readied himself for battle. Too slow. Soifun had already launched herself directly in front of him, braced herself, and snapped off a split kick that buried itself into the giant's diaphragm. It also undid several of the square buttons on his cloak. The Togabito leapt back with a high-speed technique that was unlike either Shunpo or Sonido, and his giant hands frantically fumbled to redo his buttons. The cloaks are important, Soifun realized. Now she had a target. Not letting her opponent have the time to fix the cloak, Soifun lunged forward with her sword drawn, intending to slice the cloak straight off. But the still silent Togabito once more evaded, and finally managed to finish buttoning up. Now I'm warmed up, Shinigami, he announced in a deep and threatening tone. Time for you to die. With that, he threw a right cross with his gloved hand, and suddenly his arm from the elbow down launched at high speed at Soifun, connected by a chain to the rest of his body. Soifun dodged easily. You're all muscle, she criticized derisively. Not nearly fast enough to catch me. No. The Togabito yanked back with his shoulder, arcing the remainder of his arm upwards. Sensing danger right behind her, Soifun Shunpo-ed out of the way, just in time to see the hellbound soul's massive hand clench in midair right where she'd been a second before. Still too slow. Perhaps, said a new voice, and Soifun spun around in midair to see another of the Togabito higher up than she was. But so are you. You will never stop us from finding what we are searching for tonight. And what are you searching for? You will see soon enough. The newcomer vanished, and before Soifun could turn around, she felt a hard chop to her neck, and everything went dark. Shuren dropped Soifun on the ground carelessly. Continue searching, Garogai, he ordered. The giant nodded and vanished. Urahara's head snapped around as one of his special computers beeped loudly at him in alarm. What? Soifun's Reiatsu has just dropped, and enemies are still in the area. She must have been defeated. Snatching Benihime from where she lay against the wall next to the door, the ex-assassin leapt out into the rain. From what he could tell, the Reiatsu signatures were spread throughout the city. They were searching for something. But I have no clue what that something could be. Urahara Shunpo-ed towards Soifun, hoping to get to her and fix her wounds enough for some assistance. He was almost there when suddenly a fifth signature appeared next to one of them, and their signatures rose as if they're fighting. Urahara redirected his course, seeing a potential ally in the works. However, he apparently was not the only one who had noticed the strangeness, as the other three Togabito began making their way to help their comrade. It was then that Urahara recognized where they were converging. Ichigo-kun's home. Damn it, Ishin is at the hospital helping them deal with the aftermath of transferring Karakura to Soul Society and back, and he can't get away. Yuzu and Karen are in danger. Urahara's eyes narrowed, rain soaking his clothes, but he didn't care as he drew his beloved Zanpakuto and put on another burst of speed. Awaken, Benihime. Karen stared at the newcomer as he struggled to hold back his opponent. She and Yuzu had been carried outside by some freak wearing a cloak with 2 tentacles for arms, but the new guy had appeared out of nowhere and cut off part of the freak's tentacles, which allowed her and Yuzu to drop. The new guy was dressed in a ragged thin white robe, with a black sash tying it closed and a black garment that covered his neck and collar. Below the garment dangled 2 broken ends of red chains, which was emo enough in Karen's opinion, but he also wore skin-tight black gloves that reached midway up his forearm and a manacle on his left wrist, which also bore another few links of a broken chain. The stranger's hair was sheer white, like that Hitsugaya Toshiro person who she had seen a few times, but was largely covered by yet another pitch-black strip of cloth that had been mostly wrapped around his head, even covering his right eye and cheek. In short, to Karen, if it weren't for the wicked obsidian sword he wielded with obvious skill, she would have thought him a disfigured, colorblind, emo beggar. "Run, you fools!" the stranger yelled at her and her twin. "There's nowhere for them to go," the tentacle freak replied calmly, whipping at his opponent. "Shuren will find them no matter where they are. You can't protect them forever, Kokudo." "Hey, I don't have to," the newly identified Kokudo replied with a smirk, deflecting the attacks skillfully. "Someone else is coming to help out." "I think not. He'll be kept a bit busy with my colleagues." Just then, another Togabito, the giant, appeared and snatched up both girls with his enormous hands. "No," Kokudo cried out in defiance. "No, you can't take them." Leaping away from the strange tentacles that reached to grab him, Kokudo lunged at the giant and swung mightily with his blade, only to be blocked by the chains that the giant bore on the wrist that wasn't holding the girls hostage. "You cannot cut the chains of hell with that level of power," the tentacle-wielding Togabito criticized. "We'll be leaving now, we have what we came for." Karen's eyes widened, and she met Yuzu's terrified gaze with a matching one, which was just enough for Yuzu to begin crying. "Ichi-ni," the more emotional of the sisters cried out. "Save us. Ichigo will come and save us," Karen threatened. "That's what we're counting on," Shuren's voice agreed as he appeared nearby, walking towards them calmly. "Hush, now, it's time to go to hell." "Hell," both twins' mouths opened together in horror, and called out for the one they knew would always save them. "Ichigo," they screamed together. "Ichigo." Ichigo snapped awake in an instant, up on his feet almost before Yoruichi registered that he'd awoken. "Ichigo, what?" "Not now, Yoruichi." He could still hear the echoes of Yuzu's and Karen's scream for him, and he knew that they were in deep trouble. He didn't know how he knew, but there was no time to theorize on the matter. Yuzu and Karen are in trouble. A moment later, Ichigo ripped a Garganta into being without even summoning his mask, and without a second thought jumped through. Yoruichi followed less than a second after, transforming back into a human and shunpoing to keep up with Ichigo's own high speed. Only seconds later, the two of them broke through to the living world, and Yoruichi's eyes widened for a moment. If she remembered Urahara's theories about Garganta, then the distance one had to travel in the void between dimensions had 2 factors: the relative distance between the dimensions and the power used to bridge the dimensions together. If the dimensions were close, then the trip would be short. But if they were far away, as was the case with Soul Society, as they had the Dongai between the living world and Soul Society, then sheer power could shorten the trip considerably. The sheer power Ichigo pushed into this trip, it's more than I could produce normally. It was raining as Ichigo stepped out of the Garganta with a fearsome scowl on his. And then he saw the Togabito that held his sisters in its gargantuan hand. The whites of his eyes faded to black as a burning rage took him. The Ajuka's mask materialized without being called, and Ichigo summoned his white Shikai blade. Ichigo's hollow eyes glowed with power as he lunged towards the bastards who had dared to attack his family. A bright blue Getsuga seethed around the whole blade as everyone turned around in shock. Not daring to unleash the Getsuga where his sisters could be hurt, Ichigo brought down Zangetsu on the arm of the giant who held them. The cleaver cut right through the cloak and arm as if it were made of butter, such was Ichigo's focused rage. Yoruichi appeared a moment later and quickly retrieved Ichigo's sisters, retreating to on top of the roof. "Ichi-ni, the guy in white is on our side," Yuzu cried out in warning. "His name is Kokuto, and he was delaying them from taking us," Karen added. It was a good thing that his sisters warned him, because otherwise Ichigo would have slashed out at Kokuto as he approached. "They are Togabito, residents of hell. Be careful, it's supposed to be impossible to cut through the chains that bind them to hell, so they'll use it as a defense." Ichigo fixed the assailants with his most ferocious glare. "Then I will make you wish for hell when I'm through with you," he roared, flaring his Reiatsu right before he shunpo-ed at the congregation of them. Ichigo released his grip on the white Zangetsu before snatching at the white cloth swinging in a wide Getsuga-covered arc at the Togabito. They scatter, most of them jumping up and over the blade of seething power. But they did not anticipate Urahara appearing right above them, Zanpakuto released and shining red and black. "Shibari, Benihime." A long black and red energy net emerged as Urahara swung his sword, and it caught the four Togabito in mid-jump, slamming them back down to earth painfully. Urahara landed easily a moment later. And that should be that. Now then. But then the four Togabito bellowed in unison, their Reiatsu flaring and forcing part of the net to dissipate under the pressure of their Reiatsu. "Garogai, take the woman. Taikon, keep the new guy occupied. Ganjo, retreat for now, get reinforcements." Hi. The one with tentacle arms vanished in a high-speed technique that Ichigo did not recognize but seemed similar to Sonido. "Now then," the one who had been speaking said with a smirk audible in his voice, looking at the hollowified Ichigo and Kokuto easily. "Shall we?" "You have no idea what you're up against," Ichigo breathed harshly. "Is that right? I know exactly what I'm up against, Kurosaki Ichigo, Vizard, Slayer of Aizen. I know all about your Resurrection and your Bankai, I know your Getsuga Tensho. I think you're the one who has no idea who you're facing. Allow me to enlighten you." The abominably smug Togabito bowed lightly. "I am Shuren, a Togabito, one who will be free of hell forever." "You know my Resurrection," Ichigo demanded uneasily. "Then allow me to prove to you that you know nothing. Blacken the..." "Don't," Kokuto warned, grabbing Ichigo's arm and halting his attempt at Resurrection before he could complete it. "That's just what he wants, Ichigo. You transcended Shinigami and Hollow when you fought Aizen, right? He thinks that you may have transcended the powers of hell too. If you attack him with your full strength, you might break through the chains that bind him to hell, and then he'll get even stronger." Shuren stared at Kokuto, and while his expression was hidden behind his mask, his voice betrayed being disconcerted. "You're well informed," he finally said. "Now, Ganjo." Suddenly, Ichigo felt something very familiar materialize nearby. Spinning around quickly, Ichigo gasped when he saw a red portal materialize right behind his sisters. "Move," he screamed desperately as he shunpo-ed towards his family, but it was too late. He did not have the godlike speed of Bankai to be boosted by his hollow power. He was forced to watch as two tentacles snaked out and grabbed Karen and Yuzu around the waist, making them scream in fright before pulling them through. The portal closed an instant before Ichigo reached it. "Retreat, we have what we came for," Shuren yelled, opening another portal directly underneath him. The other Togabito joined him less than a second later with their high-speed techniques. "Don't let them get away," Ichigo screamed in white-hot fury, shunpo-ing down towards Shuren even as he channeled even more Reiatsu into the white Zangetsu. "Getsuga Tensho. Shunko," Yoruichi called out, her nude form now crackling with white energy as she blended Kido with Hakuda, shunpo-ing towards the enemies with the speed that earned her the title Goddess of Shunpo. Urahara materialized right behind the three Togabito less than a moment later, tag-teaming with Yoruichi to attack on two fronts. "Sing, Benihime." Even Kokuto leapt into action, attacking from one of the sides with his obsidian blade. An explosion of Reiatsu occurred as all four attacks connected, but when the smoke faded, only no one had suffered any damage. Every one of the Togabito had used their chains to block the attacks. Shuren looked almost disappointed as the chains showed no signs of damage. "You should be far more powerful than that, Kurosaki Ichigo." And then before Ichigo could respond, the three Togabito fell into the portal and it closed behind them. Chapter 44, of Heaven and Hell. Thunder crashed, and the rain started to pick up harder, but Ichigo paid it no mind. He had failed. His sisters had been taken to hell. No, he whispered, collapsing to his knees where the Togobito had disappeared, pressing his hand to the ground, reaching for that doorway that they'd taken. They can't be. His efforts became more frantic as he struggled to find an opening, any opening, some trace of something that would grant him access to that damned dimension. No. Yuzu, Karen, give them back to me. Kurosaki, Kokuto started, but as soon as he finished the single word, Ichigo's hand was clenched around his shirt, lifting him off the ground and glaring with all his might. You, who the hell are you? Why do you feel like one of them? The wizard demanded. So you could tell. Hey, alright, no point in hiding it. I am a Togobito as well. So why did you side with us? Yoruichi asked coolly, approaching. Siding with you? That's not quite correct. It's not so much as siding with you, as it is I really don't like them, Kokuto clarified with a smirk. I'm tired of them doing whatever they please. And that's enough for you to fight them? Urahara questioned mildly. That's the way it is in hell, Kokuto replied with a careless shrug. Care to let me down? It's not like I took your sisters. In fact, I'm probably your only way into hell. Ichigo growled, but let him down. He didn't trust Kokuto at all, but the Togobito was right, Ichigo had to rely on him. Why are you willing to help me? Because you're going to go fight them to get your sisters back, of course. I want them dead, you want them dead, we have the same goals, so it's an alliance of convenience, Kokuto replied flippantly, before his voice turned solemn. Besides, while everyone condemned to hell performed grievous sins, there are those who would betray their hearts to darkness for their families. Ichigo ripped off his mask and narrowed his eyes at the Togobito in front of him. He didn't trust him, but he had helped try to save his sisters, and he could use all the help he could get. Fine, gimme a sec to check on something. He pulled out the special orb from his robes and channeled some Reiatsu into it. The image appeared, and what he saw immediately put Ichigo's hackles up. There were two men, and he watched one of them cast a Bakudo on Masaki. They're going to send her to hell. Is that so? Kokuto asked, leaning closer in interest. Didn't know the Shinigami could do that. They're not supposed to know how, Urahara explained. It's forbidden knowledge. We thought all traces of it were destroyed under Yamamoto Sotaicho's orders, but apparently someone found it. Ichigo turned to Kokuto. I have to go save my mother. The more of my family is in hell, the harder it'll be to protect them all and get them all out. Kokuto nodded shortly in understanding. You're gonna have to make a choice, Ichigo. I can't linger long, Kokuto warned. I can't stay out of hell for any extended period of time. Hell has extremely powerful protectors that serve as both the punishment for those in hell, and for devouring intruders. We call them Hell's Will, since they respond to the needs of Hell's dimension. One of them will detect me outside hell if I stick around too long, and drag me back anyway, and then I will be drained for quite some time and unable to help. We must either go now, or you will have to find your own way to hell. Ichigo was torn with indecision for a moment. He needed to get to his sisters, but he knew that as he could not keep up with the Togobito. Their speed was too great for him to match without Bankai, and Zangetsu was in Soul Society. If he could save his mother while he was there, then that was one less person to carry and protect while possibly fighting his way out from the Hell's Will. Go then. I will meet you there. Kokuto nodded, and mere seconds later he had disappeared into another portal to hell. Ichigo took a deep breath. There were so many things to do, and quickly. He turned to the goddess of Flash, and looked her straight in the eyes. At that moment he didn't care if she were naked or dressed in the best battle armor Urahara could make. Yoruichi, will you come with me? Yoruichi nodded sharply. Who all do you have in mind, Ichigo? We're bringing the wizard, Renji, Rukia, and anyone else I can recruit while I'm back in Soul Society. Urahara arched an eyebrow, but declined to comment on Ichigo's choice of comrades. Gingerly picking up the arm of the giant Togobito that the wizard had vengefully taken off, he turned to Ichigo. Then, Ichigo-kun, I now have 2 samples of the Reiatsu needed to create an artificial gateway to hell. I will begin work on it immediately, but I don't know how long it will take. That's fine. Yoruichi, I need you to go get Renji and Rukia. Urahara can tell you where they are. I'm going to the wizard, and then straight to Soul Society. I'll meet you back at Urahara's. What are you going to do there? The former leader of Onmitsukido asked quietly. Ichigo turned suddenly hollow eyes at her. I'm going to do what I have to. And then he vanished with a flicker of shunpo. Yoruichi kept track of him easily, but did not follow. Appearing at the Vizard warehouse, Ichigo pushed open the door without bothering to hold back his strength. It slammed open with a bang, making the assembled Vizard jump. Ichigo, Shinji asked, surprised. Get ready for battle, Ichigo ordered with the weight of authority, his voice demanding compliance. Meet me at Urahara's. He'll explain the situation when you get there. If you choose not to come with me, that's fine, but I will not teach you the rest of Resurrection. Make your choice. The substitute Shinigami ripped open another garganta and stepped into the void between worlds, making his way back to Soul Society. He knew the way, now. Re-emerging in Soul Society above the west gate to Seraiti, Ichigo plummeted to the ground and landed softly. Ichigo, Jidanbo queried, are you okay? No, I'm not. Let me through, Jidanbo. I'll tell you what happened later. Alright, if you're sure. The gatekeeper, still looking uncertain, nevertheless raised the gate, allowing Ichigo passage. Ichigo took a step into Soul Society and began to shunpo to where he could feel his sword was. Zangetsu raised his head as he recognized the reiatsu of his wielder coming towards him at high speed. His brow furrowed in mild confusion as he continued to follow the Kuchiki servant to the Barine mansion. Why is Ichigo here? If he needed me, why did he not call? He supposed he would find out soon enough. A few moments later, Ichigo materialized right next to him, uncaring of the other man standing next to him. Zangetsu, residents of Hell have taken Yuzu and Karen. Mom's kidnappers no doubt detected my garganta to leave, and they're already sending her off. We have to stop them. Understood. With a nod, Zangetsu began dissipating into Reishi from the bottom up, rejoining with Ichigo. My investigation has led to the Barine family. Got it. Finally addressing the escort as Zangetsu finished returning to his soul, he asked, take me to the Barine mansion, and be quick about it. Why yes sir. Shortly thereafter, Ichigo took a good, long look at the mansion, memorizing where it was and what it looked like. Done, Ichigo nodded. Thank you. Now leave, and don't look back. The servant scurried off, and Ichigo took another look at the orb, channeling more reiatsu into it. His mouth opened, his heart stopped, as he witnessed his mother unceremoniously tossed into an eye-shaped red portal. He was too late. Ichigo fell to his knees. His whole family except his father, had been taken to hell. How? He whispered. How can I have all this power, and yet be unable to even protect those closest to me? You have not failed them yet, Ichigo. Recall that Yamamoto was the one to issue the order to destroy all traces of how to enter hell. He will no doubt have retained that knowledge for a case such as this. If he cooperates, you may yet save them from being damned. Ichigo rose to his feet again, renewed by the hope his Zanpakuto had given him. He vanished in shunpo, once more heading towards where he felt Yamamoto's reiatsu. Remembering what Isshin and Urahara had said about Shinigami laws concerning Shikai, Ichigo took a few extra moments to focus outside the door to the first division to seal Zangetsu, sheathing him. Funny how easy it is when I really need it. Striding right past Yamamoto's Fukutecho, Ichigo could never remember his name. The Vizard stepped up to Yamamoto's office and struggled to keep from just ripping the door off and demanding the information he needed. Instead, he knocked. Enter. Ichigo did so quickly. Kurosaki Ichigo, why are you here? I need the information on how to enter hell. Yamamoto's eyes opened slightly from the slits he usually kept them at. Denied. Ichigo's anger flared, and he struggled to keep it in check. My sisters, he hissed, were kidnapped by the Togabito no more than 15 minutes ago. And my mother was sent there not 5 minutes ago. I must know. I will not reveal that information, Yamamoto ruled with a heavy voice. You are too valuable to risk on a mission to hell to rescue 3 souls. And how will you keep them from continuing? How many souls am I worth, Yamamoto Sotaicho? The substitute demanded, unable to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. 20, 30. They will be unable to repeat their feat. Kuritsuchi Taicho and Urahara Kazuki are working together to develop a way to block the Togebido from returning, Yamamoto stated calmly. Ichigo took a deep breath to try to dissolve his rage, swallowed his pride, some things are more important than pride, and then got to his hands and knees, and lowered his head to the floor. I beg you, help me to save my family. Protecting them is the reason I gained Shinigami powers to begin with. Yamamoto was silent for a time, taking in the unexpected sight of Kurosaki Ichigo literally begging for the information. The Sotaicho reflected for a few moments on how much that must have cost the transcended being, to bow and grovel for what he needed, when the boy had been able to achieve the strength he had through sweat and blood and trial. He is obviously not mad with power, if he is able to swallow his pride enough to beg from someone that he may be able to simply fight. Yet Yamamoto knew what would happen if Kurosaki entered the Hell Dimension. Kurosaki would be extremely prone to the effects that dimension's air had upon those who entered it. It was too big a risk. Kurosaki entering would only create one more casualty. I sympathize with your plight, Yamamoto acknowledged. It is a terrible thing, what has been done to your family. But I cannot allow you to enter hell. He was about to explain why, but Kurosaki jumped to his feet with betrayal, sorrow, and rage mingling in his expression. Fine, looks like it's time for Plan B. And with that, Ichigo Shunpo-ed out before Yamamoto could stop him. Less than a minute later, Ichigo stood in front of the Barine mansion again. He took a deep breath. There was no turning back after he did this. He hoped that his and Zangetsu's investigations were correct, because this was his last chance before having to rely completely on Urahara possibly figuring out how to get there. Ichigo purposely let his Reiatsu slip back to its unevolved state, and flared it as largely as he could. Tear the sky asunder, Zangetsu. Almost before the blade finished shifting into the magnificent cleaver, Ichigo was speaking once again. Bankai. His Reiatsu output skyrocketed, and Ichigo decided to take it a step further and drew his Jillian mask. The mansion shook under the weight of his power, and Ichigo channeled his power and began to shunpo. Only to be stopped in his tracks as three Taicho appeared in front of him with their own bursts of shunpo, blocking him. What do you think you're doing, Kurosaki? Hitsugaya demanded, Zanpakuto drawn. Beside him were Kyoraku and Yukitaki, who had both drawn their weapons and were plainly ready for combat. Move. The Barine took my mother and sent her to hell, and they have a way into hell that I need in order to save my family. You don't know what's going on, and there's no time to explain it to you. If you don't move right now, I will kill every last one of you, Ichigo warned, bringing Tensa Zangetsu to bear. No, you will not. Ichigo paused as Yamamoto appeared in front of them, cane held in one hand in front of him. Reduce all creation to ash, Ryujin Jaka. The Taicho all took several steps back as Yamamoto's cane burned away to reveal his sword, alight with the flame of Yamamoto's Reiatsu. Get out of my way, Yamamoto! Ichigo screamed, or you will see firsthand the power I used to kill Aizen. Is this what you have been reduced to, Kurosaki Ichigo? Yamamoto rebuked. Using force to achieve your goals. I tried diplomacy, you old bastard. I begged you, I got on my knees and begged. I prostrated myself to you when I have done so to no one. I would have done anything, and you still would not help me save my family, you heartless old man. He heard Hitsugaya's quiet intake of breath. Yeah, that's right, my sisters and mother have been taken to hell by the Togebido. I'm not asking to risk anyone else's lives, I just need the way in and out so I can get them out. He spat at Yamamoto, and though the liquid evaporated long before it would have reached him, the meaning was clear. So forgive me if I am a bit less than charitable, since I've met hollows with more heart than you, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. Though Yamamoto's face remained unchanged, the flames that engulfed Yamamoto's sword grew larger and more intense to reflect his obvious anger. It seems that you have chosen your path. Yes, he has. Kuchiki Byakuya appeared in a flicker of shunpo next to Ichigo. Drawing his blade almost majestically slow, he addressed the Sotaicho directly. Have you forgotten, Yamamoto Sotaicho, that this is a matter between noble families? Kurosaki Ichigo is a retainer of the Kuchiki family, as you yourself witnessed and Zangetsu accepted on Kurosaki Ichigo's behalf. Kurosaki Ichigo was investigating the kidnapping of Kurosaki Masaki with the full support of the Kuchiki, and he has evidently come across a commonality between his facets of investigation. As you have observed, the fact that the note that we received indicated knowledge of how to send a soul to hell is extremely informative. To have such forbidden knowledge is not to be underestimated. It is highly likely that they have other measures in place to prevent my being able to catch them with that knowledge. Kurosaki Ichigo is here acting as my representative and bodyguard, and his current state of bankai and hollowification is meant to sufficiently paralyze those who would hinder us within the mansion, as well as detect the Sekiseki holding room that we believe imprisoned Kurosaki Masaki. So follow the laws you uphold, Yamamoto Sotaicho. Allow me and my retainer to pass unhindered. Yamamoto audibly growled, but powered down his shikai, lowering his blade. The other Taicho took that as a sign to step aside, and Byakuya nodded regally as he sheathed his sword. Come, Kurosaki Ichigo, do not let up on your Reiatsu. If fortune is with us, its paralyzing effects will keep us from being disturbed as we find the ones who banished your mother. He purposely allowed his voice to be loud enough to be heard by the other Taicho, who now looked at Yamamoto incredulously. I will attempt to sense where your Reiatsu is unable to penetrate. Logic dictates that that is most likely where your mother was held. As large spiritual power leaves a mark on its location, we will be able to confirm that a portal to hell was opened there, and from there which members had opened it. Ichigo nodded bitterly, and the two of them began walking purposefully into the mansion. Meanwhile, outside, Hitsugaya had no idea what to say. Had Yamamoto Sotaicho really just tried to prevent Ichigo from saving his family? And Kuchiki Byakuya, who had disliked Ichigo since practically day one, had defended him and called him a retainer to the Kuchiki. Had the world gone mad? But he knew one thing for sure. If Yamamoto had attempted to keep him from rescuing Momo from a similar situation, Hitsugaya would have fought with all his power. I suppose we're lucky that Ichigo didn't just decide to slaughter us all and come back for us later. Those fools, Yamamoto breathed. Those stupid, young fools. Yama-jii, why did you try to stop them? For once, Kiraku's voice was stern and unrelenting. Yamamoto made a mental note that Kiraku was growing into his future position nicely before replying. It is as Kurosaki said. His sisters have been taken to hell. But he must not follow. The air in hell has an effect on all with hollow powers. It magnifies the hollow's effects on the mind, and for someone such as Kurosaki, who has bonded so deeply with his hollow powers, he will likely go insane in short order and never return. That is why I would not help him. He did not give me time to explain this, but instead came here to take the information from those who hold his mother captive. He wouldn't have cared. Yamamoto turned to look at the calm but determined face of Hitsugaya Toshiro. Kurosaki wouldn't have cared if he would go insane or not. He would have gone anyway. His family means everything to him, and he would risk his very existence to protect them. He turned around and began to follow Kuchiki Taicho and Kurosaki Ichigo. Do not enter, Hitsugaya Taicho, Yamamoto ordered grimly, even though he knew what was going to happen. Hitsugaya paused, then looked over his shoulder. Kurosaki would do the same for me. I can do no less. And then he disappeared into the mansion. Yukitake looked between the mansion and Yamamoto-sensei uneasily, before he sighed. He could still hear the defiant, hurt insult that Ichigo had hurled at the Sotaicho. I've met hollows with more heart than you, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. The white-haired Taicho feared that with the rash, grief-filled words of a teenager who had lost almost all of his family, the chance of peaceful coexistence had evaporated as quickly as Ichigo's spit had. He didn't want to have to choose who he would side with, because he honestly didn't know. Yukitake respected his old teacher, even if he didn't always agree with Yamamoto's decisions. But the sickly Shinigami also had to respect Ichigo's heartfelt desire to do whatever he had to in order to protect those he cared for. Wasn't that what I also strived to do? Should I be going with him? After a few moments' thought, he shook his head. They'll be fine. It's not like every Taicho can just up and leave at a moment's notice, and I can do my part by helping out with Shiro-chan's division. Kiraku, however, was having none of it. Yama-jii, we want the kid on our side. The best way to do that is to help him feel like he already is. That we will, within reason, support what he does. All you're doing right now is alienating him, and giving him yet another reason not to trust us. If he can't trust us to help him protect his family, what do you think he's going to do as soon as he gets back? His voice had uncharacteristically risen into a yell as he struggled to make his point. We had a chance to present the Gote 13 as something Ichigo could be comfortable serving in before or after his death, and now it's ruined. You've forced him to identify more with hollows. Think, Yama Jii. He's a wizard, and the most powerful Arrancar still alive ally themselves with him. Urahara and Yoruichi, two wrongfully banished Shinigami, the founder of the R&D Institute and the goddess of Flash, are his teachers. Kurosaki Isshin is his father. Are you trying to start a war that we can't win? And what should I have done? Kyoraku Shunsui, Yamamoto challenged. Simply given him the forbidden information on how to enter hell. I don't know, how about not blocking his way to his family? Kyoraku responded with rare amounts of sarcasm. He slaughtered Aizen for holding his mother hostage. Imagine what he's going to do to you for trying to permanently condemn almost his entire family to hell. Yamamoto paused. That was potentially a valid point. Perhaps it would be prudent to be on guard for an attack. Ichigo extended his senses, searching through the mansion for a place where his mother would be kept. He paid no attention to the Barine servants who were on their knees, choking for air as Ichigo's Reiatsu pressed upon them, crushing them. He barely registered their existence. In fact, his mind is utterly focused on finding that room. I believe I have found it, Byakuya reported a few seconds later. You may stop releasing your Reiatsu now. Ichigo simply crushed his mask and switched his power back into its evolved state, so no one could feel it save himself. It was too much trouble right then to rein in his emotions. Nevertheless, Byakuya nodded in satisfaction. Follow me. He vanished in Shunpo. The wizard followed easily. Moments later, they arrived at the door to the library. Ichigo pushed it open, and they entered. Inside was a large room, filled with scrolls and texts, some appearing ancient, some looking as though they were brand new, yet there was no one there. Byakuya frowned. This room, it is not large enough. What do you mean? The Sekiseki barrier extends several feet past this wall here. Byakuya raised a palm and rested it against on the bookshelves. I believe your mother's room may be behind the wall. Fine then, I'm going to open it up. I would advise against that, Byakuya warned. There may be traps if the room is opened by force. This requires some finesse, Kurosaki Ichigo. Look in the room for something that does not belong. I will investigate the wall and search for a hidden trigger. Ichigo nodded bitterly. It's a library. Libraries are for books and references and things like that. So what would be out of place here? He looked left, right. He could see nothing but desks and more books. His hands clenched into fists and Ichigo turned his gaze upwards, praying for the answer. His eyes widened. Byakuya. The ceiling. The noble immediately turned around and looked up. Above the two Shinigami, there was a series of torches, all of them lit with Kido, except one. Byakuya nodded. Well spotted. Hado 31. Shakuho. A perfectly controlled orb of red fire shot out and lit the torch, and Ichigo heard a very distinct click. The wall in question opened up just in time for the wizard to see the portal to hell finish closing. Ichigo's face morphed into a mask of rage as he gripped the two perpetrators, who had apparently been busy closing the portal for the last several minutes, by their necks and started to squeeze. He could feel their Raryoku depleting rapidly as Ichigo's evolved Reiatsu began to crush their very existence, but he couldn't have them die. Not yet. He threw them at the wall, watching them crumple to the floor in fear. Ichigo stood over them, towering and glowering as though he were an angry god. And for all it mattered to them, he was. You two are coming with me, he growled ferociously. You are coming to the living world, and you are going to explain how to open that portal to Urahara Kazuki. And you're going to tell Kuchiki Byakuya everything he wants to know, or I will hollowify. He purposely let the whites of his eyes darken into hollow black, and eat your souls. And he will watch. The terror-stricken expressions on their faces were gratifying, but not enough to make Ichigo want to kill them any less. He knocked them both out with a relatively light chop to the back of their necks. Ichigo stepped back and approached his companion. I need them to share some information with Urahara, but after that, they're all yours. Given the current situation, I believe that is an acceptable arrangement, Byakuya granted. Very well, I assume you will make the appropriate arrangements with Urahara Kazuki. Yeah, I'll get them back to you when everything's over. Ichigo made a forceful effort to return his Reiatsu back to its unevolved state, picked up the two men who'd sent his mother to hell, and hefted them onto his left shoulder. Byakuya began to leave, and Ichigo channeled his Reiatsu and ripped open a garganta. Kurosaki. Ichigo paused. That was Hitsugaya. What is it, Toshiro? I want to come with you, to help rescue your sisters. The substitute nodded sharply. Fine. I'll take all the help I can get right now. Take one of these guys and follow me. We're heading back to the living world. Hitsugaya nodded determinedly, and they stepped through. Ichigo led the way, creating a mostly solid pathway to walk on, though there were occasional fractures and it wasn't very even. But it was passable enough to work with. It didn't take long before they entered the living world just outside Urahara's shop. Stepping out and landing softly, Ichigo didn't bother to knock before opening the door and stepping through, followed closely by Hitsugaya. Ah, Ichigo-kun, I trust your visit to Soul Society was eventful. Urahara greeted. Ichigo tossed him the still unconscious body he'd carried. This is a member of the Barine family. He and this other guy. Hitsugaya laid down the one he'd carried nearby, and Ichigo barely restrained the urge to kick him. Used a spell of some sort to open a portal to hell. Now my mother's there too. I thought you could pick their brains and hurry things up a bit. Of course, the others are in the underground training room if you wish to brief them. I haven't had the time, as I've been rather busy working on a way to get you in and out safely. Ichigo nodded wearily. Right, come on, Toshiro. Hitsugaya didn't bother to respond with his usual demand to call him with a respectful suffix. It was hardly an appropriate time. Instead, he just quietly followed him down through the trap hole. Ichigo landed and quickly took stock on who all had arrived. Much to his gratification, all the Vizard were there except Hachigan. Yoruichi had managed to get Renji and Rukia there as well, though they were looking a little confused. She probably didn't tell them why they were needed. What's going on, Ichigo? Shinji asked, stepping forward. Urahara won't tell us anything, but he's working with Tessai and Hachi upstairs on something. Yeah, Ichigo, what's happened? I thought you were in Soul Society trying to find your mother. Rukia queried, confused. Wait, his mother's in Soul Society? Lisa questioned incredulously. I thought she was eaten by a hollow. The substitute Shinigami was beginning to get a headache. Shut up, he yelled, flaring his Reiatsu. There was instantly silence. You're here because my sisters were kidnapped by residents of Hell known as the Togabito. Also, one of the noble families in Soul Society, called the Barine, kidnapped my mother and tried to use her as leverage against me. But in the end, she too was sent to hell. Urahara now has the servants who sent her off, so he can re-engineer a way to get us in, and out, safely. There are only 5 Togabito that we know of right now, and one of them is friendly. His name is Kokuto, and he is waiting to aid us in hell. I don't know who or what else is there waiting for us. I don't know how strong their forces are. I don't care about any of that. Ichigo's eyes glowed bright blue with determination. We will get my family back, but I want more than that. I want those bastards to realize they never should have come here like this. We're going to invade hell and make it burn. I want them to be so terrified of my very name that they will shit themselves every time they hear it, Ichigo swore. Renji shivered. He'd seen what his friend could do firsthand, and if anything Ichigo sounded even more enraged and vindictive than he'd been against Aizen. Looks like Ichigo's going to earn that nickname of his, Hell's Nightmare. But he couldn't just let Ichigo fight alone. Rukia, on the other hand, couldn't help but stare. She'd never seen Ichigo like this, ever. But then again, his family wasn't involved before. Now it's personal, just like with me and that Kaien impersonator. She couldn't deny that the idea of going to hell terrified her. It was forbidden to Shinigami, and completely unknown territory. But she would follow Ichigo anywhere. If you want to back out, now's the time, Ichigo cautioned. Because as soon as Urahara's done, we're going in. We're with you, Renji and Rukia told him together without hesitation. So are we, Shinji spoke for the Vizard. We won't let one of our own do this alone. You're one of us, Ichigo. What they do to one, they do to us all. Ichigo's expression softened a little. Thanks. Ichigo, Yoruichi called, getting his attention. Inoue-chan, Ishida-kun and Sato-kun are on their way back. I didn't have time to tell them much, only that they were needed to protect Karakura again. The transcendent being nodded in acknowledgement. All right everyone, try to get some rest, because we need to be at 100%. Is there room for one more? A voice from the corner of the room spoke up, a voice that made Ichigo tense and narrow his eyes before turning around. Soifun stepped forward. Kurosaki Ichigo, I failed to protect your sisters when that was my task. Allow me the chance to recover my pride by coming with you to rescue them. Besides, her eyes met Ichigo's willfully, you know the power of my Bankai. Maybe this time, I can use it with pride. Ichigo's memory was a bit fuzzy of the occasion. He'd been temporarily insane at the time, and hyped up on hollow power to boot. She said it was a long-range type, and I remember something about a big explosion. Nevertheless, he nodded after a few seconds. She'd be crazy to pull one over on us while in hell. She's probably being honest. Yeah, you can come. I'm glad to hear it. Urahara's voice echoed in the training room as he slowly approached, carrying something that Ichigo thought looked like a bracelet. We'll be able to open the portal shortly. This device will signal us to reopen the portal when you're done. It's a trans-dimensional transponder designed to react to pressing this button 3 times in 5 seconds. He pointed at the small red button on the side. It's designed that way to prevent accidental activation during any fighting you may have. Once Tessai and I receive the signal, we'll open the way back, attempting to home in on the transponder. However, due to the lack of testing, we can't guarantee where the portal will open in hell, so keep your senses about. He then turned and gave the bracelet transponder to Yoruichi, who accepted it solemnly and snapped it into place around her wrist. That done, Urahara stood in front of everyone and began to chant under his breath. It took only a few moments, and then Ichigo felt it, the feel of hell. Almost as soon as he thought that, a large eye-shaped portal opened in front of him and the group. Let's go, Ichigo commanded, jumping in. Everyone else followed without a word. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.